Chapter 98. Renbaqian chatted with Du Chongkong for a while, and at the very least, he knew the identities of these people. The other was Hong Xian, the granddaughter of the ninth most powerful expert in the world, Hong Wu. Her father was called Hong Cheng, and he was a military officer stationed in the southern residence, where the remnant citizens of the Hao nation resided. He also had two older brothers who also served in the army. That Shi Yueya's father was Shi Wangu, the protector general of the south and Hong Cheng's immediate superior. As for the young sparrowhawk, her name was Lu Ruoyao. Her mother was the imperial treasury's treasurer, who was in charge of money. His father was the assistant minister of the Ministry of War. His mother was a secondary third rank, while his father was a primary fourth rank. As for Du Chongkong, when he introduced himself, he said proudly, "My father is the general of the left guard." Renbaqian gritted his teeth. They were indeed the children of big shots. There were a total of 5 protectorates in Dayo. The protector general of each protectorate was the highest-ranking military officer. The 5 protectorates were in charge of the military forces of the 5 regions. Moreover, as a protector general, even if he wasn't as strong as the world's number 9 expert, Hong Wu, he wouldn't be too weak. There was no need to talk about Lu Ruyao's parents. One was in charge of money, and the other was in charge of the soldiers' salaries and equipment. As for Du Chongkong's father, the general of the left guards, he was secondary class, rank 3. He was also one of the 2 guards that protected Lan City, and could be considered as the Empress's trusted aide. At the very least, he knew who he had offended this time. Du Chongkong finished the remaining piece of barbecued meat, but it was only enough to fill the gaps between his teeth. He was barely able to prevent himself from starving. He could only wait until he reached the top of the mountain to think of a way to get some food. "Do you guys have any martial arts?" Renbaqian asked curiously. He had long wanted to learn cultivation methods. However, Caretaker Shi and Xiong Pai only knew how to temper the body. Those were the methods used by the aboriginals, and they were the inferior ones. If Renbaqian used those methods, he would probably burn himself to death in no time. He had a lot of guesses about the Qingxin Palace Hall, but he hadn't learned many characters yet, so naturally he didn't have the chance to search for it. Moreover, he reckoned that the real good stuff was on the 2nd floor, where there was an old lady watching over it. It was rare for Renbaqian to get to know the son of an official. A 3rd-rank official should have some good stuff in his hands, right? Cultivation method? You can't learn from my family. However, I do have a few books from Great Xia at home. If you want it, give me something good to exchange for it. All right, I'll look for you when I get back. Renbaqian was overjoyed to hear this. There were always some things on earth that could move him, as long as he was willing to exchange them. Your fire starter is not good enough. You need something good. Du Chongkong did not forget to remind him. Don't worry, it's definitely something good, Renbaqian immediately replied. Not long after, he heard the sound of a horn. It's about to start. Du Chongkong called out to Renbaqian and ran into the distance. After that, the others also gathered there and stood in a few messy rows. Renbaqian followed her and found a corner to stand at. After waiting for the young masters to gather in groups of 3 or 5, a woman in armor stood in front of everyone. Under the armor was a woman full of heroic spirit. She was Xian Jia, the commander of the palace guards, whom Renbaqian had met a few times. Now the great hunt begins. His Majesty wants to see your bravery, and your bravery will be displayed through your prey. The top 3 can enter the 2nd floor of Qingxin Hall to study for 3 days. This is your reward, and also your honor. For Dayo, the people around them shouted. The shouts of hundreds of people were like a tsunami, completely displaying the advantage of the aboriginals' loud voices. Even though it was just a few words, Renbaqian was somewhat influenced by the shouts of the others. For the tribe, and everyone, if you are in the top 3, you will get the same reward. Xian Jia's words moved the hearts of the other young masters. Other than people like the 7th prince, not many people could resist the temptation of the Imperial Library of Dayo. Dismissed. Come back before noon tomorrow, Xian Jia ordered. Everyone cupped their fists at her and left in 2s and 3s. Seeing that everyone had dispersed, Renbaqian strolled to the side of the net mountain bird and took off his sleeping bag. His bulletproof vest and other things were tied up inside. Just now, when Xianja said that the top 3 could enter the second floor of Qingxin Hall to study for 3 days, he was a little tempted. There must be something good on the second floor of Qingxin Hall. Unfortunately, he knew his limits. Even if he had a pistol, he didn't think he could beat those humanoid Gundams. It was better for him to honestly ascend the mountain and come back. It would be more suitable for him to exchange things with Du Changkong. Furthermore, by getting on Du Changkong's good side, he should be able to exchange things with others through him. He didn't know if the glass cup could fool this group of people. When the time comes, he could add a song called Grape Wine in the luminous glass cup, and it would immediately become pretentious. In any case, there were plenty of good things, and he wasn't worried that he wouldn't be able to exchange them. Renbaqian unhurriedly packed up his things. He put aside the crossbow, an aesthetic, military knife, and other things that he was going to bring up the mountain and prepared to put on the bulletproof vest. The bulletproof vest wasn't just for protection against guns. It could also protect against all kinds of physical attacks. It was a life-saving tool. Storyteller Run. Renbaqian quickly got up upon hearing this voice. Xianja was standing behind him. Her Majesty said that she wants to eat mountain wolf meat and needs Storyteller Run to bring it back. Come back when you find it. Renbaqian's heart tightened. What did she mean by wanting to eat mountain wolf meat? Didn't she want him to go up the mountain to look for wolves? If she really wanted to eat it, why would she need him? If she couldn't find it, would he have to stay on the mountain at night? This was obviously a punishment. Was this because of Du Changkong or because of Hong Xian and Lu Ruoyao? Renbaqian shouldn't be punished for what happened afterward. It was most likely because of Du Changkong's pig-headed teammate who added drama for him. Her Majesty also said that most of the mountain wolf meat isn't tasty, but there will definitely be a small wolf with short front legs that tastes the best. Even meeting a wolf depended on luck. Was she asking him to look for a pack of wolves? Didn't she want to see his physique? If he went, he would be directly fed to the wolves. I have a matter to discuss with Her Majesty. I'll have to trouble you to pass on the message, Renbaqian said to Xianja. I have passed on the message. Let's see if Her Majesty wants to see you. Xianja turned around and returned to the carriage. Renbaqian absent-mindedly waited for the Empress to summon him. A pack of wolves with short front legs. Wasn't this embarrassing? Was there really such a thing? But could he really catch this thing? Even if he didn't have a target, it wouldn't be easy for him to survive in the forest. Furthermore, she wanted him to find this thing. Wasn't this asking for his life? A few minutes later, Renbaqian was summoned to the carriage. The Empress said lazily, "What do you want to tell me?" Chapter 99. When the Empress heard what Renbaqian said, she didn't know whether to laugh or cry. After looking at him for a while, she said, "You were so awe-inspiring just now. Why are you so timid now?" Renbaqian said cautiously, "I was speaking the truth just now. Regardless of whether they are a rank 9 official or an unranked official, they have all contributed and bled for Dayo. They can be punished for their mistakes, but they can't be treated casually by others just because they have a better family background. Those meritorious people, those soldiers who have shed blood for the nation, will be bitterly disappointed if they encounter such a thing." The Empress smiled. "I didn't say that you did anything wrong." In fact, she saw what Renbaqian did, and it was to her liking. Nowadays, some of the sons of high-ranking officials were indeed somewhat domineering. Normally, she would turn a blind eye to you being domineering, but if you dare to rob and beat up the officials of the imperial court, who do you think you are? Your Majesty, you want me to look for that wolf. With my current physique, I can't even lift my shoulders or lift my arms. Even killing a chicken will take a lot of effort. I'm afraid I won't be able to return," Renbaqian said. "Don't you want to go to the second level of Qingxin Palace Hall to take a look? The treasures of the Hao Nation's royal family are all there. If you can find a suitable wolf, even though you might not be able to become an expert, you will at least be able to gain something." The Empress was smiling all along. "I want to take a look, but I know my limits." Renbaqian lowered his head and replied honestly, "It doesn't matter if you don't have the strength to fight a chicken, or if you have other tricks up your sleeves. In any case, I want to see that mountain wolf. If you can't catch it, it's fine as long as you stay on the mountain for a night. Just take it as your punishment for teaching that kid from the Du family. If it was someone else, it wouldn't be so easy. Furthermore, there aren't many people who would bargain with me like this. The Empress glared at Renbaqian and gave him a look that said, "If you dare to bargain again, I will teach you a lesson." When Renbaqian heard that, he immediately put on a long face and said, "Your Majesty, I am willing to do anything for you. I won't hesitate to go through water and tread on fire." Even though he wasn't the one who taught Du Chongkong those tricks, it seemed that it was useless to say anything at this moment. "I will be waiting for your mountain wolf. Remember to get the one with the shorter legs as it tastes better." After the Empress finished speaking, Renbaqian left with a sullen face. He sighed and returned to the mountain-gazing bird's side. He took off his jacket and holster and put on the bullet-proof vest before putting it back on. At the same time, a waist pouch hung behind him. It was filled with anesthetic and some bullets. The saber was strapped to his leg. Finally, with the crossbow on his back and the crossbow in his hand, he randomly chose a direction to go up the mountain. Just now, when he went to see the Empress, the others had already gone their separate ways and headed up the mountain. The mountains stretched as far as the eye could see, and no one knew how big they were. Otherwise, if it was just a small hill, it wouldn't be able to contain any ferocious prey, and there would be no need to come here to hunt. Following behind Renbaqian were some young masters from the 3 nations. After they were done with their preparations, they ascended the mountain unhurriedly. To them, this was just a game. Even though the Empress's reward was very tempting, not many people actually put it into action. After all, there were still 200 to 300 ancient race youths. It wouldn't be easy to fight them for the top 3 spots. Only a small number of confident people plunged into the mountain at the first instance. It seemed that very few people came to this mountain. It was filled with tall trees that could be hugged with both hands. Once one entered the forest, it became dark. The tall canopy of the trees blocked most of the sunlight. Renbaqian carried the crossbow with an arrow. He didn't walk far in before he started to feel inconvenient. There were vines everywhere, and he had no choice but to pull out his saber to chop the vines before he could move forward. After walking for less than an hour, he didn't see anyone else in the surroundings. It was quiet all around, and only the occasional chirping of birds and the howling of unknown beasts could be heard. This kind of environment made Renbaqian a little nervous. After all, this was a forest from another world. Before coming here, he already knew that there were many ferocious beasts here. F***ck, Renbaqian suddenly cursed. Suddenly, a stick stood up not far from his feet. Upon closer inspection, it was a snake that was as thick as the mouth of a cup. It raised its head and almost scared him to death. Renbaqian stood rooted to the ground, and didn't know whether he should retreat or not. If he made an inappropriate move and got bitten by the snake, he would be wronged. He also didn't know if this snake was extremely poisonous. It would be a joke if he was poisoned to death as soon as he entered. Renbaqian slowly took 2 steps back. He didn't dare to move too much for fear of angering the other party. After he took 2 steps back, the snake lowered its head and burrowed into the bushes at the side. Phew! Renbaqian heaved a sigh of relief. He was really nervous to death just now. After this experience, Renbaqian finally learned his lesson. He found a small tree and chopped off a branch from it. After peeling off the branch, he used it as a stick and swept it in front of him while walking. This way, he could chase away any snakes on the ground. Very soon, this stick came into effect. However, it wasn't on the ground. Instead, it was on a hanging vine. After sweeping it with the stick, it immediately came to life. After that, Renbaqian became even more careful. He felt very bitter in his heart. This place was simply dangerous for him. After walking for a while, he suddenly heard a sound that sounded like a cat's meowing in front of him. He immediately stopped in his tracks. Soon after, the bushes in front of him started to rustle, and it seemed like something was about to emerge from it. Renbaqian immediately raised his crossbow and aimed at the bushes. He was prepared to shoot at anything that emerged from it. As the bushes shook, a white rabbit head appeared. It was about the size of a dog and had a mouth full of fangs. Renbaqian was simply too familiar with it. This thing existed in the beast park. It wasn't a rabbit, but a babe. It had a very ferocious temperament, and was a type of ferocious beast that lived in groups. The fighting strength of the babe wasn't very strong, but its biggest characteristic was that no matter what it saw, whether it was a human or a saber-toothed tiger, it would charge forward and bite. At that time, Renbachian observed for a period of time, and realized that this was indeed the case. Normally, animals wouldn't be as impulsive as the babe when they saw a huge creature. In Renbachian's memory, there was only one type of animal, and that was the big geese that were reared in the countryside. Due to the unique visual structure of geese, everything they saw was much smaller than it actually was. As a result, they dared to charge forward and peck at everything they saw. In the countryside, they were practically tyrants. Many children who grew up in the countryside had been bullied by those big white geese. When Renbachian was young, he would often go back to the countryside with his father to visit his grandfather. As a result, the first time he went back, he was chased by a big white goose for a few hundred meters. His entire body was pecked black and blue. From then on, whenever he saw a big goose, he would take a detour. Later on, when his younger brother grew a little older and brought him back to the countryside, Renbachian intentionally encouraged his younger brother to look at those big geese. The outcome was obvious. The fighting strength of the big geese was off the charts. In the end, his younger brother came back crying. This kind of babe gave him the same feeling. Even though he didn't know if his suspicion was correct, Renbachian still didn't have a trace of hesitation. He raised his hand and shot an arrow at it. The babe leaped forward, and that arrow immediately left a bloody scar on its head. Even one of its ears was grazed by the arrow. Immediately, it pounced towards Renbachian crazily. An injured wild beast was the hardest to deal with. This saying wasn't wrong at all. Looking at the babe pouncing towards him, Renbachian didn't even have time to reload another arrow. He immediately used the crossbow to block the head of the babe. This thing's body size was similar to that of a dog. It was quite strong and almost pounced on Renbachian. Renbachian had to press down to block the sharp teeth of the babe. The head of the babe was still trying its best to stretch forward, wanting to bite off a piece of flesh from Renbachian's body. Its claws also scratched Renbachian's chest, immediately tearing his clothes. Fortunately, the bulletproof vest was effective. Renbachian cursed. He took out the pistol from his waist and fired 2 shots at the babe. 2 drops of blood appeared on the body of the babe. Only then did it wail and fall to the ground. Renbachian didn't dare to hesitate. He immediately turned around and ran. This thing lived in groups. If he killed one and another group of them came out, he reckoned that he would be in trouble. However, the more one was afraid of something, the more likely it would happen. A sound that sounded like a cat's meowing could be heard from behind him. As Renbachian ran back, he searched all over the place. After running back for a while, he finally found a tree that seemed to be of a suitable thickness and height. There weren't any dangerous vines on the tree as well. He carried the crossbow on his back and immediately climbed up the tree. At the same time, 5 or 6 white figures appeared not far behind him. They were meowing like cats and were drooling as they pounced towards Renbachian's direction as if they had rabies. Not long after Renbachian left, a very young imperial guard entered the carriage. He knelt on one knee and greeted, "Your Majesty." "Wu Fang, go to the forest and look after storyteller Ren. As long as he doesn't die, you don't have to make a move. If he really encounters any danger, save him and don't let him discover you. If he is hiding somewhere, think of a way to get him out." The Empress gently swirled her wine cup as she spoke. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan looked at each other and revealed smiles on their faces. Her Majesty's intention was already very clear. Regardless of whether Renbachian taught Du Changkong to say those words, he was still a suspect. Her Majesty was also too lazy to seek evidence. Did Her Majesty need evidence to do anything? Her Majesty's thoughts were very simple. She definitely wouldn't let you die, but she couldn't let you hide in one place obediently and comfortably either. She had to teach you a lesson. However, Her Majesty was really giving preferential treatment to that person. In these few years, this was the first time they saw Her Majesty paying so much attention to someone. If it was someone else, they would have either been beheaded or sent to the border army. Chapter 100. Ah! Renbachian, who was climbing up the tree, cried out in pain. After the baby-s pounced on the tree, they used the tree trunk as leverage and scurried up. Even though Renbachian had already climbed more than 2 meters high, his buttocks were still scratched by their claws. Renbachian made use of a relatively thick branch above him, and flipped himself up. Those baby-s were still trying their best to jump up. The only good news was that baby-s couldn't climb trees. Even though they could use the tree trunk to jump higher, they couldn't reach Renbachian, who was more than 3 meters above the ground. Renbachian, who was riding on the tree trunk, felt a burning pain in his buttocks. Damn it, I was almost F***ed. Renbachian cursed. He looked at the baby-s below him as if they had stolen his wife. Now that you can't reach me, it's your turn to be unlucky. Renbachian took the crossbow from his back and loaded it with an arrow. He aimed down and pulled the trigger. Following a blood-curdling scream, the body of one of the baby-s was penetrated by the crossbow arrow. The death of the baby-s made the others even more furious. One by one, they stood up and clung onto the tree trunk, but they couldn't climb up no matter how hard they tried. Bastards, don't you dare leave! Renbachian grimaced in pain as he aimed at the baby-s one by one. How dare they touch my buttocks? I have to take revenge. Do they really think my buttocks are so easy to touch? When he killed the third baby-s, the remaining 3 baby-s finally had the intention to retreat. They bared their teeth at Renbachian before running back to where they came from. Renbachian raised his crossbow and took aim for a while before shooting another arrow. This time, the arrow hit the leg of a bay-beast. That bay-beast howled miserably as it limped and disappeared from sight with the crossbow in tow. After the baby-s left, Renbachian heaved a sigh of relief. He touched his buttocks. His hand was bleeding and it was extremely painful. He didn't even dare to sit down, and could only sit on the tree branch with the other half of his buttocks. Climbing trees was indeed an essential skill for surviving in the wild. Fortunately, he often visited his grandfather in the countryside with his father. He also stole bird eggs and developed a strong tree climbing skill. Otherwise, even if he had a gun, he wouldn't be able to survive against the 6 baby-s. Even if he could keep his life, he would be injured all over, and it wouldn't just be a small injury to his butt. After the baby-s left, Renbachian wasn't in a hurry to get down from the tree. He pondered in his heart. It seems that the smell of blood can attract beasts, right? Why don't I cut open those baby-s and bleed them to see if I can attract some animals over? In any case, he didn't know where to look for that bay. It would be best if it attracted them, but if it didn't, he would just have to stay on the tree until noon tomorrow. It was safer than running around. The more Renbachian thought about it, the more he felt that it was a good idea. If that was the case, it wouldn't be difficult to endure until noon tomorrow. As long as he could attract some animals, he could kill 2 of them. Even if he couldn't kill the bay, he could still report back. At this time, he was immersed in the joy of finding a way to easily endure until tomorrow. His butt did not feel so painful anymore, and there was a smile on his face. He felt refreshed, and he was just short of singing majestic. Let out the blood of those baby-s first and retrieve the crossbow bolts. Renbachian made up his mind and slipped down from the tree. One by one, he dragged the baby-s corpses to a place slightly further away. Following which, he plucked out the crossbow bolts and placed them back into the quiver without wiping them. Next, he took out his military knife and cut open the baby-s stomachs one by one, allowing the smell of blood to be even stronger. After he was done, Renbachian crawled back to the path he came from. He first climbed up to a height of about 4 meters. He felt that it wasn't very comfortable there, as the tree branches were thinner. Hence, he climbed back to his original position. The next step was to wait and see if any fish would take the bait. Taking advantage of this time, he tore a piece of cloth from his clothes and bandaged the wound on his butt. He had to admit that it wasn't easy to bandage this area. Every time he touched it, he would feel a sharp pain. After Renbachian bandaged the wound with great difficulty, no fish took the bait. However, he heard someone screaming in pain from afar. Which unlucky fellow is that? Renbachian gloated. It definitely wasn't an aboriginal. It should be one of those Scions. However, they only brought along a follower. Furthermore, they were still in the periphery. There shouldn't be any powerful beasts. So powerful? He has been shouting for 2 minutes without taking a breath. He's even more powerful than Luciano Pavarotti. Renbachien muttered to himself while frowning. This was because the sound seemed to be coming from his direction from afar. Furthermore, it wasn't slow. When he first heard the sound, he estimated that it was about 200 to 300 meters away from him. Now, it was less than 100 meters away. Furthermore, it wasn't just that person's scream. There was also the sound of a relatively large object colliding in the forest, and the sound of a tree trunk collapsing. Boom. When that figure appeared in front of Renbachien, a tree that wasn't considered very thick was knocked down. Following which, a giant wild boar that was at least 2 meters tall appeared in front of Renbachien. Its fangs were more than half a meter long and looked like 2 long swords that were stuck in its mouth. It stared at Ning Kaichen as it charged forward. Such a big wild boar? Is this a boar-shaped tank? Renbachien was shocked by the size of the wild boar. Wild boars were considered rather troublesome to deal with in the mountains, especially adult male wild boars. Even tigers wouldn't easily provoke them. Wild boars had thick skin and a thick layer of fat. It was very difficult for ordinary predators to cause fatal damage to wild boars with their teeth. Instead, their intestines would be sliced out by the other party's fangs. The old people often said, 1 wild boar, 2 tigers and 3 bears. Those big wild boars that weighed 600 to 700 kilograms were as lethal as tigers and other ferocious beasts. Needless to say, the one in front of him was at least 2 meters above the ground. It was simply like a bulldozer. When it ran, the ground shook. Renbachien could feel it even from the tree trunk. Renbachien reckoned that his pistol wouldn't be able to cause much damage to this wild boar's skin and fat layer, unless he hit a vital point such as its eyes. The person who was being chased by the wild boar and screaming was a familiar person, Ning Kaichen. He was walking in an S-shaped pattern while screaming like a pig being slaughtered. He had to admit that he was too daring to provoke such a fellow after entering the forest alone. An ordinary person wouldn't be able to avoid such a big wild boar in time. Renbachien only took a glance and heaved a sigh of relief. He held his breath and even shifted his gaze to other places. He only paid attention to the direction in which the wild boar and Ning Kaichen were running from the corner of his eyes. This was to prevent himself from being detected by the other party. However, what made Renbachien want to curse was that after Ning Kaichen made an S-shaped turn, he was running in the direction of him. Chapter 101. Just when Renbachien was hesitating whether he should jump down and run in another direction or stay here and try his luck, Ning Kaichen saw a few babies' corpses on the ground. He raised his head and looked around. Suddenly, his eyes lit up and he waved his hand at Renbachien. Renbachien's position was easily recognizable. "What the hell are you waving at?" Renbachien cursed in his heart and pointed to the side. At the same time, he pointed his crossbow at Ning Kaichen. His meaning was clear. "Run in that direction and don't mess with me." Ning Kaichen was very tactful. When he saw Renbachien's hand gesture, he shouted, "Ah! Help!" She made a turn and passed by a tree that wasn't far from where Renbachien was hiding. That bulldozer-like wild boar also ran past the tree by a hair's breadth. Phew! Renbachien heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, Ning Kaichen didn't drag him down with him. Otherwise, he would have shot him with the crossbow. Such a huge wild boar could probably be the king of this forest. "Ning Kaichen, you are very loyal this time. I will burn incense for you. Have a safe journey." Renbachien expressed his gratitude sincerely. After the movements of Ning Kaichen and the wild boar were far away, Renbachien continued to sit on the tree. This nearby tree was the most suitable. Since the wild boar had been lured away, there was no need for him to change his location. Not long after, silhouettes began to appear in the surroundings. They were all fox-like creatures. They looked greedily at the bay beast corpses on the ground. However, they didn't rush over. Instead, they circled around the area to see if there was any danger. "These things aren't prepared for you guys." Renbachien spoke softly and shot an arrow at one of the foxes. However, the arrow was slightly off. That fox was immediately frightened, and all its fur stood up. After looking around, it turned into the forest. The other foxes circled around. They couldn't bear to leave, but they didn't dare to go near. Renbachian shot another arrow and pierced through another fox. The other foxes immediately turned into the forest and disappeared without a trace. After doing this, Renbachian continued to wait. Since he had nothing to do, he checked his waist bag and found a plastic bottle. Only then did he remember that he had brought anesthetic with him. Just now, he was so nervous that he had forgotten about it. However, it would not be easy to knock out such a huge wild boar with anesthetic. However, he still soaked the front end of the crossbow bolt in the bottle, and only took it out after more than 10 seconds. After waiting for a while, she suddenly heard the sound of footsteps. She turned her head and looked in the direction of the sound. To her surprise, it was Ning Kaichen again. She didn't know where he had left the wild boar behind him. Ning Kaichen climbed up the tree in a few steps. His movements were very accurate. It seemed like he had done a lot of climbing trees to get bird eggs. Covered in dirt, he crawled to Renbachian's side and sat down. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "You scared me to death just now. They almost caught up to me. Luckily, I ran fast." "You actually got rid of him? How did you offend him?" Renbachian asked. As long as Ning Kaichen could get rid of the wild boar, he did not mind having a companion. In fact, it was quite boring to stay on the tree alone. Upon hearing Renbachian's question, Ning Kaichen was at a loss. "I don't know either. I was walking in the forest when that guy suddenly rushed out as if he had killed his father. Fortunately, we managed to shake them off." "Are you alone?" Renbachian asked again. "I heard that the beasts in the mountains and forests of Dayo are different from those in Great Xia. I just came up to take a look and didn't think of any rewards." Ning Kaichen smiled embarrassedly. Ning Kaichen was also a travel enthusiast. From this point of view, he was quite daring. "Let's stay here first. It's safer than going down there," Renbachian said. After finishing his sentence, he pricked up his ears and listened carefully. "Did you hear anything?" Ning Kaichen listened attentively as well. Soon after, his gaze froze. Boom! Both of them heard the sound of a tree crashing to the ground. Following which, they saw a huge figure sniffing the ground. It raised its head and stared fixedly in the direction of Renbachian and Ning Kaichen before charging over. "Damn it!" Renbachian cursed. It was unknown whether he was cursing Ning Kaichen or the wild boar. He immediately jumped to the ground, rolled on the ground, and ran away with all his might. "It will chase after you. You better stay away from me." Renbachian didn't forget to shout. He immediately dived into the forest and ran for quite a distance. When he realized that Ning Kaichen and the huge wild boar weren't running in his direction, he slowed down his pace. His lungs were burning. He recovered as he walked. He didn't want to know how the wild boar targeted Ning Kaichen. He just wanted to find a suitable tree to climb and rest on. No matter what, it was safer to stay on a tree. Renbachian felt himself getting more and more tired. Now that he was going uphill, running was tiring. Now that the danger was temporarily resolved, and the wild boar was chasing after Ning Kaichen, Renbachian stopped and leaned against a tree to rest. "Hey, isn't this Deputy Ren?" Just as Renbachian stopped and leaned against the tree, two people appeared from behind the tree in front of him. Renbachian felt that the voice was familiar. He looked up and recognized the person. It was Lian Baocheng, the brain-damaged second generation. He was wearing a brocade robe. In front of him was the guard who used a knife to stop Mr. Emptiness from spitting out a mouthful of blood. "What a king coincidence," Renbachian said unhappily, but his heart was in his throat. In such a big forest, he actually met two groups of people coincidentally. He didn't know if he was unlucky or something else. Renbachian didn't know what happened to Ning Kaichen, but to meet Lian Baocheng twice in a row, it wasn't just a coincidence. Why did he meet both groups of people in such a big forest? Previously, it was fine for him to hide in the tree. However, after meeting Ning Kaichen, that jinx, he met Lian Baocheng nearby. Renbachian felt that this wasn't just a coincidence. Whether it was a coincidence or not, Renbachian didn't feel that he was a match for the guard in front of him. The speed of the blood arrow shot by Mr. Emptiness wasn't slow compared to the speed of the crossbow arrow, but it was stopped by the other party's knife. From this, one could see the strength of the guard. It's indeed a coincidence. Meeting Deputy Run in the wilderness really makes me feel gratified, Lien Baoqing said maliciously. Ren Baqian naturally knew that he had offended Lien Baoqing badly. At this moment, when he heard what Lien Baoqing said, a bad feeling arose in his heart. While panting, he pointed the crossbow arrow at Lien Baoqing and said, "You miss me so much. What do you miss me about? Tell me, I'm listening." Lien Baoqing's gaze wandered in all directions. After looking around carefully, he smiled at Ren Baqian and said, "Of course I miss you to die. Her Majesty is at the foot of the mountain. You dare to touch me?" Ren Baqian said coldly, "It's hard to say what happens in this forest, right? It doesn't seem surprising that you died here. As long as we dig a hole, we won't even find your corpse. Who would know how you died?" Lien Baoqing had a crazy look on his face. "I have never been humiliated like this in my life. If you stayed in Lon City and didn't come out, I wouldn't have any good ideas. Since you came here, you can't blame others. You can only blame yourself for being too reckless." Chapter 102. What do you want? As long as I can do it, I will promise you anything. Ren Baqian took a step back and looked a little flustered. He didn't dare to fire the crossbow in his hand. Because he only had one arrow, if he missed, he wouldn't even have the last thing that could threaten or harm his opponent. "I'm happy to see you die." Lien Baoqing had a mocking look on his face. From his point of view, Ren Baqian was like a rabbit that had been cornered into a corner. Although he still had a crossbow in his hand, it posed almost no threat to him. Ren Baqian clenched his teeth and shot an arrow at the guard. Even though Lien Baoqing was the mastermind, the bodyguard was the knife. Even if Ren Baqian killed Lien Baoqing, the bodyguard could still kill Ren Baqian. Not to mention, he might not even be able to kill it. Clang! The steel saber in the guard's hand drew a white light, and the crossbow bolt was immediately deflected. Seeing this, Ren Baqian became even more flustered. "I can use something to exchange for my life," Ren Baqian shouted. "I'm not interested in your things. I'm more interested in your life." Lien Baoqing had a complacent smile on his face. He was not in a hurry to kill Ren Baqian. Instead, he was more interested in Ren Baqian's terrified expression. He enjoyed seeing a person who was originally a tyrant make such an expression in front of him. "Don't you think that I look very similar to the seventh prince?" Ren Baqian shouted anxiously. "I know the secret of the seventh prince's identity. I will use this secret to exchange for my life. You can use this secret to obtain countless benefits. He will promise you anything," Ren Baqian shouted anxiously. "Yin Wei." Lien Baoqing's expression froze when he heard this. He stopped Yin Wei from moving forward. At this moment, Yin Wei was less than 10 steps away from Ren Baqian. "Tell me everything you know," Lien Baoqing said sternly. In his heart, he was thinking, could it be that the seventh prince is not the emperor's biological son? Impossible. How could such a thing happen? However, Ren Baqian looked exactly the same. He hadn't seen the seventh prince before, but 2 days ago, he paid a visit to the seventh prince. When he saw the seventh prince's face, his heart was filled with shock. After hearing Ren Baqian's words, he started to mutter to himself. Could it be that the seventh prince was a twin, and one of them was wandering outside? If that was the case, Ren Baqian wouldn't be able to live. "You have to promise to let me leave this place." Ren Baqian panted loudly. He looked very nervous. "If what you say is of any value, then I will. But you have no choice." "Ren Baqian, now there are only the 3 of us here. You have no other chance," Lien Baoqing said as he looked at Ren Baqian. Ren Baqian looked at Lien Baoqing and Yin Wei, who was 10 steps away. "If you want to not say it, you want to die." "The seventh prince isn't the son of Great Xia's emperor," Ren Baqian gritted his teeth and said. "Nonsense. How is that possible?" When Lien Baoqing heard this, he could no longer maintain his composure. His face was filled with shock. "Ren. Say. Ren." As Ren Baqian spoke, he threw the crossbow on the ground, and took out a dark green elliptical sphere with a black cover from his waist. He held it in his right hand and said, "The evidence is in here. I will give it to you, and you will let me leave. If you don't promise me, I will destroy it." Renbaqian threw the crossbow on the ground. As Renbaqian spoke, cold sweat broke out on his forehead. When the other party saw his expression, they thought that he was afraid. Indeed, he was afraid, but he was afraid that the thing in his hand would suddenly explode. Although it would not explode if the safety clip was pressed, he was still afraid. If anything happened, he would be smashed to pieces. Lian Baoqing looked at Renbaqian and laughed. Yan Wei is within 10 steps of you. Do you think you have the chance to destroy it? Renbaqian's face changed. Do you think it's so easy to get your hands on this? I can tell you that there are 2 layers. The innermost layer is the evidence, and the outermost layer is strong acid. If I fall on the ground, the acid will destroy the innermost layer. You can choose. Do you want to kill me, or do you want to keep this secret? After hearing what Renbaqian said, Lian Baoqing pondered for a while, then nodded his head and said, "All right, I promise you. Give me the things and I will let you go." Renbaqian said, "Swear that you will let me go and not lay a finger on me for a day." Lian Baoqing smiled and said, "Okay, I promise you." On a tree not far away from the 2 of them, a man looked at the scene below and hesitated. He didn't know if he should snatch the thing from Lian Baoqing. This secret should be handed over to Her Majesty. Judging from the man's expression, it was obvious that he didn't take his promise seriously. He knew that as long as Storyteller Run handed the thing over, the other party would kill him immediately. This Storyteller Run was too stupid to actually expose such a secret. No matter who the other party was, they wouldn't let him leave alive. This secret was too important. Renbaqian clenched his teeth. He suddenly raised his hand and threw the green ball at Lian Baoqing. Then he turned around and ran. Yan Wei jumped up and grabbed the green ball. He sneered. "Do you think you can run away? Give me the thing and kill him." Lian Baoqing was ecstatic. If what Renbaqian said was true, even if he killed an Earthwill expert, he would be able to explain himself when he returned. However, at this moment, a figure suddenly appeared and pounced toward Yan Wei. No matter what, he had to snatch the evidence first. This was too important, even if he had to expose himself. Renbaqian, who turned around and ran, also paid attention to his back. At the same time he counted in his heart, 1, 2, 3. Then he threw himself forward. Yan Wei had just received the green ball when he had a bad feeling. At the same time, he realized that someone was pouncing toward him from the forest. He turned his body slightly and pointed the long saber in his hand at the other party. "Who's there?" Boom. The green ball in Yan Wei's hand suddenly exploded. A huge flame and airflow spread out from a point with countless fragments. Yan Wei was sent flying by the huge explosion. At the same time, his left hand disappeared. At the same time, countless fragments hit his body. His whole body was like a broken puppet, and there wasn't any sound at all. His entire upper body was missing like a broken doll. Even half of his head was missing. Lian Baoqing was shocked by the explosion and the loud sound. He subconsciously covered his head with both hands and sat on the ground. That black figure forcefully twisted its body in the air, stepped on a tree trunk beside Lian Wei, and flew sideways. A few seconds later, it disappeared into the shade. After confirming that he was out of sight, Wu Fang checked his body. Even though the explosion was relatively far away from him, it still affected him. There were a few metal fragments on his body. Those fragments were too fast and too close to him. He couldn't dodge them in time. Fortunately, they only pierced into his skin and weren't very deep. Liar. Wu Fang gritted his teeth. He pulled out the 2 biggest shrapnel from his body and tore a few strips of cloth to bandage his wounds. If he still didn't know that Renbaqian was a complete liar, he would be a fool. Previously, he thought that Renbaqian was stupid. Now, he felt that he was stupid. He was angry that he was cheated. Chapter 103. Renbaqian clenched his teeth as he passed through the smoke. His gaze swept across Yan Wei's tattered body, and immediately felt a little nauseous. However, most of his attention was on Lian Baoqing, who was sitting there in a daze. Lian Baoqing couldn't figure out what had just happened. How did that green sphere suddenly explode into countless fragments, along with that huge sound wave and a ball of flame? How did his guard leader die just like that? Even though Yan Wei had just attained the Earthwill level, he could be considered a small expert. Even though the Lien family wasn't considered the top in Great Xia, they were considered outstanding among the second-rate families. There were only 6 earth will experts in the family. The practitioners in Great Xia were divided into the spirit will level, also known as the wisdom palace. Next was the heaven will level, also known as the path to heaven. Below that was the earth will level, also known as the earth embryo level. Below that was the man will level. Most practitioners couldn't even attain the man will level. Only 1 out of 100 practitioners could attain the man will level and truly control the body. Only 1 out of 1,000 man will practitioners could attain the earth will level. It could be said that this was 1 in 100,000 practitioners. Even those who had just attained the earth will level could obtain the position of a deputy general in the army. Those who reached the peak of the earth will level could be considered experts. Only those who reached the peak of the earth will level could be called the earth embryo level, and could borrow the power of the earth. As long as they stood on the ground, they could absorb the earth's energy to restore their physical strength. Having 1 foot in the earth will level meant that they had the potential to attain the earth embryo level. If they were lucky, they could even break through the heavenly gate and step onto the path to heaven. Such people would be valued everywhere. The Lien family had spent countless efforts over the years to nurture and recruit 6 earth wheel experts, which was enough to show how precious they were. He had always been favored by his father. Furthermore, he came to Dayo, so he was paired with 2 experts who had just attained the earth wheel level. One was Lien Baoqing, and the other was Yen Wei. A few days ago, Lien Baoqian was ordered to be trampled to death by that mad dog. Even if he was favored by his father, he wouldn't be able to escape punishment. As a result, he hated Ren Baoqian to death and wished he could skin him and eat his flesh. On one hand, he was humiliated, and on the other hand, it was because of this. After confirming the direction of Ren Baoqian, Lien Baoqian, and Yen Wei returned in this direction. He was originally looking for Deputy Ren, but he didn't expect Ren Baoqian to appear in front of him, as if he was being chased by a dog. This almost made him burst into laughter. There was a path to heaven, but you didn't take it. Instead, you barged into hell. I was looking for you, and you came running in front of me. However, what happened next took a sudden turn. Yen Wei died just like that. Lien Baoqing's eyes were filled with fear and sluggishness. The fear was because of what had just happened, and the sluggishness was because of Yen Wei's corpse. He hadn't even seen the Empress, and 2 Earthwill experts were already dead. When he returned, he would definitely be punished according to the family rules. Thinking of his own ending made him tremble all over. Ren Baoqian held the gun and walked to within 10 meters of Lien Baoqing. He pointed the gun at Lien Baoqing and took a deep breath. Lien Baoqing recovered from his daze and saw Ren Baoqian, who wasn't far from him, raising his hand and pointing the black object at him. What was that? Lien Baoqing didn't think too much about it. He was about to go crazy. Are you lying to me? Lien Baoqing looked at Ren Baoqian with reddened eyes. He still had a glimmer of hope in his heart that what Ren Baoqian said was true. If that was the case, he would still be able to explain himself when he returned. He was like a drowning man who would not let go of anything he could grab onto. Isn't this nonsense? Lien Baoqing stared at Ren Baoqian as if he had a rabid dog. I will kill you and bury you with him. He pounced on Ren Baoqian ferociously. Even though his martial arts weren't very good, he had practiced for a few days when he was young. He hadn't even reached the threshold of the man-will level. However, everyone could see that Ren Baoqian didn't know any martial arts at all. Therefore, the only thought in Lien Baoqing's mind right now was to kill this bastard who caused him to end up like this. No matter what, he had to kill him. He also believed that he would definitely be able to kill Yen Wei. If Yen Wei was like this, Ren Baoqian would still be a little worried. This was also the reason why he didn't dare to take out his gun. If he couldn't kill Yen Wei, he would be dead meat. But now, facing Lien Baoqing, he didn't have to worry at all. Ren Baoqian looked at Lien Baoqing as if he was looking at a fool. His fingers slightly trembled as he pulled the trigger. Bang! 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 3 crisp but soft gunshots were heard. It wasn't like the sound of a silencer installed on a TV or in a game. Ren Baoqian only knew this when he was practicing at the shooting range. The sound of a silencer could only reduce the sound of gunshots, but it was still a bang, or 2 sound. Following the 3 gunshots, Lien Baoqing froze on the spot. He raised his arm and touched his chest. All the strength in his body gradually disappeared. The expression on his face changed from anger to incredulity and fear. What exactly was in his opponent's hand? Plop. Lien Baoqing fell to the ground. He could only breathe in and not out. Just now, a shot had hit his lung, and blood was spurting out of his mouth. Ren Baqian went behind him, aimed at Lien Baoqing's back, and fired another shot. Only then did he feel more at ease. This wasn't the first time he put someone to death. He had already taken a few lives under his orders, but today was the first time he killed someone with his own hands. In particular, Lien Baoqing was killed by him, which made him feel somewhat uncomfortable. He took a few deep breaths to calm himself down. However, the tightness in his heart was still there. Wu Fang, who was hiding under the shade of a tree, squinted his eyes. Why did this storyteller run have so many strange things on him? Initially, he didn't know why Her Majesty was so interested in a foreigner. Now he more or less understood. Ren Baqian sat on the ground. Just now he didn't seem to have done much, but he was really nervous. He didn't have any confidence in facing Yen Wei with a gun. In the end, he told a big lie and threw a grenade at Yen Wei. If he failed, he would probably have to draw his gun and fight it out with Yen Wei. However, he didn't have any confidence in winning. Even a crossbow arrow could be blocked by a knife. Could a gun really deal with it? Fortunately, Lien Baoqing was from Great Xia. The lie that the 7th prince wasn't the biological son of the emperor had indeed attracted the attention of Yen Wei and caused him to have all sorts of greedy thoughts. Now he had won. All the strength in his body was gone. After sitting on the ground for a few minutes, Ren Baqian thought about the 2 corpses. The explosion of the grenade just now wasn't soft. He was afraid that it would attract people. If no one came, the corpses of the 2 would be eaten by wild beasts in no time. Unfortunately, the explosion just now was too loud. Even though it wasn't easy to meet people in this forest, there were still many people in the surroundings. In particular, such an explosion would probably attract many people's attention. Presumably, people would come soon. There wasn't enough time for him to move the corpses away. Ren Baqian didn't dare to delay any longer. He got up to pick up the crossbow and carried it on his back. Then he went to look for Yen Wei's knife. When he came back, he slashed Yen Wei's body a few times until the corpse was beyond recognition. Even though he couldn't tell how Yen Wei died since the people in this world didn't know about grenades, he still did it. Only then did he feel a little more at ease. After all, he was just an ordinary person previously. He didn't know how to destroy corpses and didn't have the time to do so. He could only do as much damage as he wanted. He endured the disgust and cut open Lien Baoqing's abdomen to look for the bullet in his stomach. However, as he searched, his stomach turned upwards until it reached his throat before he could push it back down. Ren Baqian really didn't dare to think about anything else. It was too disgusting. He was afraid that he would vomit now. The 9mm bullet he used had a strong stopping effect, but its penetrative ability was average. Even at a distance of 10 meters, it might not be able to penetrate a human body. Finally, he found 2 bullets in Lien Baoqing's stomach. One bullet was fired from his chest when he stepped on Lien Baoqing's back. He couldn't find the last bullet. After doing all this, Ren Baqian cut off half of Lien Baoqing's neck. He didn't dare to delay any longer. He looked around and couldn't find the crossbow arrow. After he was far away, he couldn't help but bend over and vomit. Ordering others to kill, personally using a gun to kill, and finally cutting open the other party's abdomen to look for bullets were 2 completely different things. Just now, Ren Baqian almost couldn't hold it in anymore, but he forcefully endured it. At this moment, he vomited out everything in his stomach. After vomiting stomach acid for a long time, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of water to recover his strength. Then he walked away again. He didn't walk far before he heard the sound of a stream. He followed the sound. The stream wasn't big, and it was so clear that he could see the bottom. He could see a few fish swimming in it. After Ren Baqian confirmed that there was no danger, he splashed a lot of cold water on his face. This made him feel much better. Then he slowly cleaned the bloodstains on his hands. Chapter 104. He washed his hands clean and didn't pay much attention to the bloodstains on his body. There wasn't a lot of blood. When he was doing other things, Lian Baoqing was already dead and his heart had stopped beating. Therefore he didn't spit out much blood. Most of the blood was on his hands. There were also some other bloodstains. After all, he had a wound on his buttocks. It wouldn't make sense to say that it was smeared on his hands. Ren Baqian filled his water bag with water. The stream water in this world was relatively clean. Of course, he couldn't do anything if it wasn't clean. After that, he went back along the original path. He wanted to see who found the corpses and what conclusions they would draw. It was impossible to find him in a short period of time. After all, he wasn't strong enough to kill people. The others had never seen a gun or a grenade before. He wouldn't use a grenade unless he had no other choice. As for the gun, it would be fine as long as he didn't find the missing bullet. The wounds had already been damaged by him. Ren Baqian had already tried his best to hide himself, and he couldn't do any more than that. If he had enough time, he would rather hide the two corpses. After a day, they would be eaten by wild beasts and no clues would be found. Ren Baqian thought it would be easy to find his way back. However, he couldn't find his way back even after walking for a long time. When he was running, he didn't pay attention to the surrounding scenery. This forest was huge. He almost got bitten by a snake before he could find his way back. It was easy for him to go down the mountain. However, it would be difficult for him to find a place in the forest. After going around in circles, Ren Baqian found his way back to the stream. He looked down at the soil beside the stream and searched from bottom to top. Many animals would come to the stream to drink water. In particular, places with many animals would leave footprints. This was common knowledge. Ren Baqian found a place with many paw prints. He wasn't sure if it was left by a wolf or a feline. He found a suitable tree nearby and climbed it. Now he just had to wait for those animals to come to drink water. If he was lucky and encountered a bay, he could go down the mountain. In any case, Ren Baqian was trying his luck. It would be great if he could encounter one. If he didn't, he wouldn't be allowed to go down the tree. He would wait until tomorrow morning. After staying in the tree for a while, Ren Baqian thought of something. There was a small bottle in his bag. It was given to him by Tai Dao in the morning. It was said to be able to attract wild beasts within a certain range. If he threw this thing out, would it attract the mountain wolves and the bay? However, Ren Baqian hesitated for a while before putting the bottle back into his waist pouch. This thing was too risky. If it attracted wild beasts like the wild boar, it would be his turn to be unlucky. Ren Baqian stayed in the tree. Not far away, Wu Fong was hesitating whether he should think of a way to chase Ren Baqian down from the tree. The Empress had instructed Ren Baqian to make him move if he were to find a place to hide. However, Ren Baqian's current position was overlooking the river, and it could be said that he was preparing to hunt. This made Ren Baqian somewhat uncertain. He subconsciously touched his chest and arms. The wounds on his body made him make up his mind. At this moment his ears suddenly twitched, and he concealed his aura. The sound of footsteps could be heard nearby, and it wasn't just one. After a while, Ren Baqian heard the sound of someone walking in the forest. He held his breath. In a minute or two the two men came out of the woods to the river. A man and a woman. They were aboriginals. The man walked around the riverside and nodded. "This is it. Let's wait here. We should be able to gain something." "You're not going deeper?" the woman asked. "I can't snatch it from them, so I won't waste my energy. Furthermore, I saw traces left behind by a black fatty nearby. It looks like it's not small, so it's reasonable if we manage to hunt it," the man said. Both of them were about 16 or 17 years old. The man was tall and carried a pair of hammers in his hands. In other words, two iron blocks that were the size of cantaloupes were equipped with handles. The woman was full of heroic spirit. She carried a longbow on her back and a dagger on her waist. Ren Baqian was slightly stunned when he heard their conversation. There were actually people who thought highly of this place like him. However, after thinking about it, it was normal. He had learned this knowledge from television. And these aboriginals were much better at hunting than him. It was impossible that they didn't know about it. However, what kind of animal was the black fatty that they were talking about? According to the man's tone, it should be another name for a rather powerful wild beast. It seemed like the two of them had the same idea. Should he show himself? Renbachian thought again. He couldn't possibly keep hiding here, right? If he was discovered by the other party sooner or later, he might as well greet them first. Furthermore, it definitely wouldn't be dangerous to meet aboriginals. When Renbachian thought of this, he called out softly, "The two of you. Who's there?" The two of them turned around abruptly. "It's you." After seeing Renbachian, the two of them spoke in unison. "I have been here for a while. When I saw the two of you coming over, I felt that I should greet you," Renbachian said. "Since you were here first, let's change places," the man immediately said. "You don't have to change places. I only want a bay. The rest are yours," Renbachian immediately said. He actually hoped that the two of them would stay here. That way he would be much safer. As he spoke, he slid down from the tree and walked to the two of them. Only then did he realize that the two of them looked very similar. It seemed like they were brother and sister. "The two of you?" Renbachian nodded at them. The two of them first looked at the crossbow in Renbachian's hands before asking, "What's a bay?" "It's a wolf with short front legs in a wolf pack. It's different from ordinary wolves," Renbachian explained. He had only heard of the word bay before. He didn't know what it looked like exactly. It should be a wolf with short legs. The woman suddenly understood. There are wolf footprints here. However, short-legged wolves are rare. We might not meet them. It doesn't matter. It's best if we can meet them. It doesn't matter if we don't. It's fate that we met in this forest. Let's team up, Renbachian said. The two of them didn't mind Renbachian's suggestion. Anyway, Renbachian didn't want other animals. The two of them only wanted to get something to report back. If he could hit that black fatty, that would naturally be the best. "How do I address the two of you?" Renbachian asked again. "Quan Yonglin." "Quan Yongha," the two of them said. The man was Quan Yonglin, and the woman was Quan Yongha. "Renbachian. I know you, Deputy Run. I met you this afternoon. I heard Gujio mention you before," Quan Yonglin said. His attitude was like he was talking to a stranger. He wasn't hostile, but he wasn't enthusiastic either. This was normal and Renbachian didn't mind. "What's the relationship between Gujio and Gu Shaoqing?" Renbachian asked. Previously he met Gu Shou. Without asking, he knew that he was Gu Daxiong's biological son. When the two of them mentioned Gujio, Renbachian felt that he might be Gu Daxiong's nephew. He's Gu Shaoqing's second son. Quan Yonglin's words confirmed Renbachian's suspicions. After the two of them met, Renbachian asked again. "What are the two of you going to do? Are you going to wait here?" "The two of us will go to the other side of the river. If there's any prey that we fancy, we'll make our move," Quan Yonglin said. There was a big rock at the other side of the river. It was about 3 meters tall. It was a good place. Chapter 105. Renbachian walked to the bottom of the tree, but he wasn't in a hurry to climb it. He turned around and looked at the two of them. The two of them leaped over the 2-meter-wide stream and landed on top of the huge rock. Renbachian couldn't help but feel envious every time he saw their skills. Renbachian suppressed his envy when he thought that he would be able to exchange the martial arts manual with Du Chongkong and practice it himself. Another thing that made Renbachian envious was that the space on top of the rock was very big, and it was much more comfortable to stay there. However, it seemed that the two of them didn't really like him. Renbachian turned around and climbed the tree. Just as he turned around and was about to climb, he heard a hissing sound above his head. He looked up and saw a snake as thick as a bowl looking at him with its tongue sticking out. Renbachian was shocked when he suddenly saw a snake above his head. He had experienced a lot this afternoon, and could more or less control his emotions. He took 2 steps back, and when he raised his crossbow and was about to shoot, he realized that it wasn't just one snake. There were a few snakes crawling on top of the tree. The thick ones were as thick as a cup, and the thin ones were as thick as 2 fingers. When he was on the tree just now, he didn't realize there were snakes nearby. However, a few minutes after he came down from the tree, they had already occupied his place. Ren Baqian took a few steps back, and the snake no longer paid attention to him. However, Ren Baqian wasn't willing to let the nest that he had found be occupied just like that. This tree was the most suitable one in the vicinity. He raised his crossbow, aimed at the biggest snake and pulled the trigger. The biggest snake was immediately nailed to the tree trunk and twisted its body in pain. Another arrow was shot at the curled-up snake. The snake's head was raised high, as if it was struggling. Ren Baqian shot the next arrow at a snake not far away. The arrow penetrated the back of the snake's head and nailed it to the tree trunk. After nailing 2 snakes to the tree, the other snakes naturally felt the danger and started to crawl on the tree trunk. One of them swam to the ground and went into the forest. Ren Baqian looked at the few snakes that were scurrying around. He didn't make any more moves because he realized a problem. These snakes wouldn't die immediately after being nailed to the tree. The tree was only so big. With a few snakes nailed to it, he didn't dare to go up. Ren Baqian pondered for a moment. He turned his head and looked around to find a tree that he could hide behind. The tree couldn't be too short, as it wouldn't be safe if it was too short. They couldn't be too tall or too thick, or they wouldn't be able to climb up. The view should be better. Of these conditions, the tree that had just been occupied was the one that was the most suitable. While Ren Baqian was looking around, he suddenly felt as if someone was looking at him from behind. He turned around abruptly and pointed his crossbow at the other party. In the next second, Ren Baqian's face turned pale as he turned around and ran. "Help!" Ren Baqian shouted like a little girl who was about to be molested to attract the attention of Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe. At the same time, he ran to the stream, jumped into it, and trudged to the other side. Following behind him was a saber-toothed tiger with brown fur and fine stripes. It looked at Ren Baqian with ridicule in its eyes as it walked out of the forest unhurriedly. Ren Baqian jumped into the stream and discovered a big problem. The depth of the water seemed to be knee-deep, but after a few steps, the water had already reached his waist. The amount of strength needed to walk forward was much more than he had expected. With great difficulty he climbed up to the shore. That saber-toothed tiger had also reached the side of the stream. He reckoned that the saber-toothed tiger would be able to reach him with just a pounce from the distance of 2 meters. However, the saber-toothed tiger's gaze wasn't on Ren Baqian. Instead, it was looking at the top of the rock. It growled and slowly retreated. On the rock, Quan Yonglin didn't care about the saber-toothed tiger. However, Quan Yonghe drew his bow and aimed at it, making it feel threatened. Without waiting for the saber-toothed tiger to retreat, Quan Yonghe shot an arrow. In any case, Ren Baqian didn't see anything. That saber-toothed tiger let out a blood-curdling scream as the arrow pierced through its hind leg and pierced into the ground. Just now, when that arrow was shot, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly pounced forward. Otherwise, its back would have been pierced through. After suffering this injury, the saber-toothed tiger no longer retreated. With a furious roar, it ran to the side of the stream and pounced over. At this moment, the saber-toothed tiger's eyes were filled with madness and ruthlessness. Fortunately, he wasn't the saber-toothed tiger's target. Otherwise, he wouldn't even be able to run away. "Hey!" Quan Yonglin stood on the rock and laughed. He swung the 2 hammers that were the size of honeydew melons in his hands and leaped down. The 2 hammers carried an enormous power as they smashed towards the saber-toothed tiger's head. The saber-toothed tiger was originally prepared to pounce on the rock. After seeing Quan Yonglin's power, it immediately shifted its body to the side. Soon after, it opened its bloody mouth and bit towards Quan Yonglin's waist. Just by looking at its mouth of sharp teeth, one would know what would happen if one was bitten. At the same time, its pair of front claws slapped towards Quan Yonglin's body. This action was similar to a pounce. After running for more than 10 meters, Ren Baqian turned his head and saw this scene. He felt that if the saber-toothed tiger was facing him, he would definitely be dead meat. However, Quan Yonglin didn't panic in the slightest. He flipped his hand in midair and smashed the saber-toothed tiger's face with his hammer. Bang! The saber-toothed tiger let out a miserable howl. Normally, if such a big metal hammer were to smash the face, it would definitely be smashed into pieces. Furthermore, Ren Baqian understood the strength of the aboriginals very well. He had seen the scene of a person being sent flying for 7 to 8 meters, and even penetrating the wall with just a kick. It was even more impossible for a son of a high-ranking official like Quan Yonglin to be weak. However, what made him astonished was that the saber-toothed tiger actually only let out a miserable howl. A few of its teeth were knocked out. Following which, it became even more ferocious and smashed Quan Yonglin away. Was this saber-toothed tiger made of iron? Was this really a saber-toothed tiger? Wasn't it a Decepticon? Rinpoche took in a breath of cold air when he saw this round of confrontation between the two of them. He was frightened. When this saber-toothed tiger was locked up in the beast park, he didn't think much of it. He didn't expect it to be so ferocious. Not to mention other things, its ability to withstand attacks was already somewhat terrifying. Quan Yonglin was sent flying and fell into the small stream. The saber-toothed tiger's eyes were bloodshot, filled with brutality and madness. Following that, it pounced over. Just as Quan Yonglin fell into the small stream, he kicked off the water with both of his legs. He raised his hammer high and smashed it towards the saber-toothed tiger once again. He gave off an indomitable feeling. Even if it was a mountain in front of him, he would still smash it violently. Bang! Quan Yonglin was sent flying again. The saber-toothed tiger also let out a miserable howl as it was smashed onto the ground. This time, the iron hammer directly smashed onto its head. The eye that was slightly injured just now was directly smashed into pieces. Now both Quan Yonglin and the saber-toothed tiger's eyes were bloodshot. They pounced on each other again. The saber-toothed tiger was beaten crazy. It was truly crazy. As for Quan Yonglin, Rinpoche felt that he might have sand in his eyes. You aren't even injured. Why are your eyes so bloodshot? The two of them collided once again. However, the saber-toothed tiger suddenly turned around and whipped Quan Yonglin with its tail, sending him flying away. Its tailbone was also ruthlessly smashed by Quan Yonglin's hammer. It let out another miserable howl. Now Rinpoche didn't know who looked more like a wild beast, Quan Yonglin or this saber-toothed tiger. In any case, the feeling that Quan Yonglin gave Rinpoche was, I don't care about dodging, tricks, or techniques. Don't be a coward. Just do it. Swing the hammer and smash. During the fourth confrontation, Quan Yonglin's two hammers whistled through the air and smashed onto the saber-toothed tiger's head. The saber-toothed tiger groaned before it was smashed back onto the ground again. Its body twitched slightly. It might have been smashed to death. At the very least, it had a severe concussion. It was reckoned that even a Decepticon would be crippled by these two hammers, let alone a saber-toothed tiger. Quan Yonglin flew out once again. After rolling on the ground, he leaped to the side of the saber-toothed tiger and smashed the saber-toothed tiger's head with his iron hammer. Bang! 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 Rinpoche looked at Quan Yonglin as if he was forging iron. The ground was also trembling. Rinpoche felt apprehensive. Chapter 106. Seeing Quan Yonglin's crazed look, Rinpoche was alarmed and jumpy. On the other hand, Quan Yongha, who was on the rock, acted as if he didn't see anything. After Quan Yonglin jumped down, he sat there in a daze. In the end, Quan Yonglin could no longer see anything on the ground except for a puddle of Lao Gan Ma. Quan Yonglin finally stopped, walked to the stream, and threw the hammer into the water. Then he jumped in and washed the flesh off his body. After everything was done, he picked up the hammer and stood in the stream. He shouted at Quan Yongha, "Let's go. The saber-toothed tiger is dead. The other animals will smell it from afar. They won't come anymore. Can you not make it so disgusting next time?" Quan Yongha said with a look of disgust, but he still jumped down from the rock. This thing is quite strong. I couldn't hold back for a moment." Quan Yonglin laughed. "It's not that you can't hold back, right? I have never heard of anyone who can't hold back and still wants to whip a corpse and smash it into minced meat." Rinpoche cursed in his heart. He stood far away and didn't say a word. "I'm afraid there won't be any animals coming to this riverside today. You should go somewhere else." Quan Yonglin shouted at Rinpoche again. Rinpoche nodded vigorously. In any case, he wouldn't get close to Quan Yonglin anymore. Initially, the two of them looked quite good, but when they started fighting, it was too crazy. If others were by his side, they naturally wouldn't be afraid. But if they were to get too close, they would probably be killed by his hammer. Just now, with bloodshot eyes, Renbachian didn't dodge or evade the saber-toothed tiger's attack. He didn't even let the saber-toothed tiger off, and even wanted to smash the saber-toothed tiger into minced meat. This really terrified Renbachian. Renbachian was a good citizen. Although his hands were stained with 2 lives, he was still a good citizen. Renbachian's weak body didn't dare to get too close to such a person. After the 2 of them left, Renbachian sat on the ground and thought about it. He felt that he had been cheated. Initially he was having a good time here. However, his old nest was occupied and they even killed a saber-toothed tiger. Judging from what they said, the other animals probably wouldn't dare to come here today. If he wanted to hunt, he would have to find another place. It had always been dangerous for him to wander around in this forest. After pondering for a while, he felt that it was better for him to stay here. His goal wasn't to hunt, but to find a place to stay. It didn't matter even if he had to stay out all night, as long as he could return safely. As for hunting, whoever wanted to do it could do it. After watching the battle just now, Renbachian had a deeper understanding of how dangerous this forest was. Just like the saber-toothed tiger just now, its body was at least 3 meters long, or even 4 meters long. It was only slightly smaller than the wild boar, but it was almost as tall as him when it stood on all 4s. Its strength and resilience were even more astonishing. At the very least, it didn't do much when it was hit in the face. It was only after a few consecutive hits on its head that it lost the ability to fight. Renbachian reckoned that he wouldn't be able to do anything even if he used his pistol. If it wasn't for Quan Yonglin's presence, he would have been in trouble. The saber-toothed tiger wasn't a human. It wouldn't stupidly let him stuff a grenade into its mouth. Originally, he thought that a pistol would suffice. But now, he realized that a pistol was only useful against people who were not very strong. Regardless of whether it was the wild boar or the saber-toothed tiger, a pistol would not be of much use. Not only against wild beasts, but even against Quan Yonglin, it might not be of much use. If Renbachian didn't remember wrongly, the strength of a tiger's palm strike was at least 1 ton. Just by looking at the size and strength of this saber-toothed tiger, one could tell that it wasn't any weaker than the tigers on Earth. However, when it hit Quan Yonglin, it only sent him flying. After rolling on the ground, he was able to stand up and didn't seem to be affected at all. Furthermore, the saber-toothed tiger's claws only left a few shallow wounds on Quan Yonglin's body. This kind of result also demonstrated Quan Yonglin's physical defensibility. His body was really too tough. He was afraid that if this pistol hit him, the bullet would at most be stuck in his muscles. Unless it hit a vital point, it wouldn't cause much damage to the opponent. Furthermore, the opponent wasn't a blockhead. His speed was much faster than Renbachian's. If Renbachian really used a pistol to meet someone like Quan Yonglin, he would definitely be the one to die. If such a situation really happened, Renbachian felt that the situation would be him shooting, the opponent would throw the hammer at him, the opponent would be bitten by a mosquito, and Renbachian would die. Everything would be over. It might still be possible to use a rifle as the velocity of the bullet was 2 times higher than a pistol. If it was used against an ordinary person at close range, there wouldn't be much of a difference. However, if it was used against people in this world, there would be a huge difference. If he were to use a rifle, he reckoned that the opponent would be turned into a hornet's nest after a round of bullets. Renbachian sat there and pondered for a while. He turned his head to look at that huge rock and pondered how to climb up. He had seen this rock before, but he felt that it would be very difficult for him to climb up. Therefore, he obediently stayed on the tree. It was easy for Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe to climb up, but Renbachian didn't have any skill points for climbing. He circled around the rock twice. This rock was about 3 meters high, and there wasn't any place for him to climb. Finally, Renbachian took a few steps back. Then he sprinted and used his foot to climb up the rock. However, only his palm could reach the top of the rock. It was an inclined surface and he immediately slid down. Renbachian tried a few more times in different directions, but all of them ended in failure. Renbachian had to admit that when he watched videos, it was easy for others to climb. When it was his turn, he realized that it looked easy, but in reality it was hell. Sigh. Renbachien sighed. He had no choice but to continue walking upstream along the stream. At the same time, he looked around to see if there was a suitable place to hide. Although Quan Yonglin said that there wouldn't be any animals coming, he wouldn't even have a place to hide if an animal came. At this moment, the sun was already setting. There wasn't much time left before the sky turned dark. Renbachien felt that he had to find a place to hide before the sky turned dark. There were many predators in the forest at night. In addition, his line of sight was too short, so it was even more dangerous than during the day. If possible, Renbachien hoped to find a relatively small crevice, the kind where large animals couldn't enter, to hide for the night. In the end, he didn't see the place he was looking for along the way. However, there were a few trees that were suitable for him to hide in. Renbachien walked to the nearest tree, and threw more than 10 rocks at it. After confirming that there weren't any snakes, he climbed up the tree himself to take a look. Only then did he feel relieved, and returned to the ground. He walked around and saw the bushes moving. Renbachien held his breath. A moment later, a white head popped out. When it saw Renbachien, it immediately bared its teeth. Without any hesitation, Renbachien raised his hand and shot an arrow at the creature's chest. Then, Renbachien immediately ran. It was actually a bay beast again. Why were there so many of them in the forest? Renbachien ran all the way to the side of the stream. Only then did 4 bay beasts chase after him like mad dogs. They ran all the way while drooling. It seemed like they were treating Renbachien as their dinner. Renbachien had the same idea as them. He took out a gun from his back with his right hand, and fired more than 10 shots consecutively. In between, he even had the energy to change the magazine. Chapter 107. Renbachien started a fire, and roasted one of the babay's legs. He even used stones to build a circle in the stream, and soaked the other leg in it. The smell of blood would be washed away by the stream. This leg would be left here for tomorrow's breakfast. As for the other corpses, they were thrown far away to prevent the smell of blood from attracting other animals. He was now holding on to the idea of going down the mountain the next morning. As for the bay and the like, they could go to hell. After witnessing that battle, the danger level of the wild beasts in this world skyrocketed in his heart. I'm not Ultraman, I can't beat little monsters. At this point in time, the sky had already started to darken. The bonfire by the stream flickered brightly, and he could hear the roars of beasts in the distant forest. Renbachien had a strange feeling in his heart. Unfortunately, it wasn't the feeling of being close to nature or anything like that. It was just eerie, terrifying, and full of danger. He used a knife to make a few cuts on the babe beast's leg. Then he sprinkled some seasonings on it before turning it over and roasting it. After a while, the fragrance began to spread far away. Wu Fang, who was on a tree not far away, rubbed his belly and took a bite of the berry in his hand. These were the few that he had picked nearby. They were very sour and barely enough to fill his stomach. Smelling the fragrance in the distance, he began to feel unbalanced. Renbachien was obviously so weak, yet nothing happened to him after he wandered around in the forest for an entire afternoon. After killing 2 people, he was still able to strut around and roast meat. Not only was he injured, but he also couldn't tell anyone about it. It was too embarrassing. Moreover, he had to watch the other party eat meat while he ate berries. Thinking up to here, the 5 parties felt dejected. There was really no one to reason with. Although Wu Fang's face was mournful, his hands suddenly grabbed out like lightning. When he returned, there was already a snake that was as thick as 3 fingers. He exerted force from the back, and the body of the snake that was originally coiled around his arm fell down. He took out a knife and cut open the snake's head, skinned it, and took out its internal organs. Then, he stuffed the tail into his mouth and bit down, imagining that it was barbecued meat. As the aroma drifted out, Renbachien felt that he was getting hungrier. He stared at the meat on the bonfire, waiting to eat his fill. Today could be said to be a tough day for an ordinary person like him. If possible, he hoped that there would never be a next time. Unfortunately, in the foreseeable future, it would be difficult for him to rest well tonight. After all, even if they were in the trees, there were still many dangers in this forest. The tree could only help him avoid some danger, but it was not a place where he could rest easy. The sound of footsteps could be heard, and a figure emerged from the darkness. Renbaqian immediately pointed his gun at the figure and asked, "Who is it?" "Deputy Ren? It's great to see your true self." Ning Kaichen, who was dressed in rags, cheered. His eyes were brimming with tears when he saw Renbaqian. "Why is it you again?" Renbaqian couldn't help but think. Renbaqian didn't know what to say since he was able to encounter them twice in such a huge forest. He had always suspected that Ning Kaichen was pretending to be weak. However, Ning Kaichen had always shown that he was as weak as him. Furthermore, Ning Kaichen's body was covered with bloodstains from fighting in the forest, and his clothes were torn into several pieces. From the looks of it, the wild boar was chasing it quite miserably. But at this time, he was still in the forest and did not go down the mountain. "Why didn't you go down the mountain?" Renbaqian asked. Generally speaking, these young masters would only come here to experience the scenery, and would go down the mountain to rest at night. "Just now, I saw a beautiful scenery. Due to my greed, I looked at it for a while longer and couldn't find the way down the mountain," Ning Kaichen said shyly. "Deputy Run, if you are interested, I can bring you there tomorrow morning. Watching the sunrise and sunset there is like being in a fairyland." Renbaqian wasn't interested in watching the sunrise and sunset. He was only interested in going down the mountain and sleeping peacefully in his bed. "However, it's great to see Deputy Run." Ning Kaichen cheered again. "I initially thought I would have to starve tonight. In the end, I saw the fire from afar and thought that it was fate that we met in the wilderness. I came over to ask for some food. I didn't expect to see Deputy Ren here." Renbaqian continued to roast and knead the wild boar. He didn't dislike Ning Kaichen, who loved to brag. After all, Ning Kaichen was a person who was easy to get along with. In Lan City, Renbaqian didn't let him down and didn't feel that Ning Kaichen would harm him. Furthermore, he felt that it was good to have a companion on such a night. After all, he was a social animal. Even if he didn't like to gather with others, it didn't mean that he was willing to stay alone in the wilderness. Even if he listened to Ning Kaichen brag, he would feel better for the night. As for whether Ning Kaichen was pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger, Renbaqian didn't really care. Looking at the babe leg that was about to be cooked, Renbaqian felt that it would be difficult for the two of them to eat it. It didn't matter even if they weren't full. It was better not to roast the leg that was soaking in the stream as it was too troublesome. Now that the sky was so dark, it was better to finish eating and return to the tree. The two of them impatiently waited for a long time before Renbaqian brought the babe leg back. The aroma that assailed their nostrils made them want to eat it immediately. After waiting for the babe leg to cool down a little, the two of them started to tear off the meat from the leg and stuffed it into their mouths. It tasted like dog meat and was very fragrant. After a while, the entire leg was in their stomachs. Both of them laid on the pebbles beside the stream and sighed comfortably. "Deputy Ren, your cooking skills are really good." Ning Kaichen lay at the side and exclaimed in admiration. Renbaqian smiled and didn't reply. It wasn't that his cooking skills were good, it was that the seasoning was good. Furthermore, the meat of the animals in this world was better than that on Earth. The giant goat that they ate previously was one of them. After lying down for a few minutes, the roars of beasts could still be heard from afar. Some were near while some were far away. The nearest one was about 300 to 400 meters away. Renbaqian sat up from the ground and said, "I'm going to go up the tree to rest." After finishing his sentence, he added some branches to the fire. He hoped that the fire would burn for a longer time. He turned around and walked to the bottom of the tree. Renbaqian looked up and immediately cursed, "Damn you." He saw that there were a few more snakes on the tree. Renbaqian couldn't help but wonder if he had the physique to attract snakes. Wherever he stayed, the snakes would crawl. Furthermore, they would specifically wait for him to leave before occupying his place. "What's wrong with my uncle?" Ning Kaichen asked with a perplexed look. "Your uncle is a good person." Renbaqian replied without turning his head. He turned his head to look for other trees that he could rest on. Just now he saw a few trees. Ignoring Ning Kaichen, who was behind him, Renbaqian walked back and found another tree that was suitable for him to hide in. In the end, when he reached the bottom of the tree, he heard a hissing sound. Renbaqian was extremely depressed. Why was he so unlucky? Why did the snakes choose whichever tree he liked? I'm not Su Xian. Why do you have to do this? Chapter 108. On the way back, Renbaqian noticed that there were snakes on the few trees that he had noticed earlier. This left Renbaqian speechless. At this moment, the light from the fire couldn't reach his position. Renbaqian looked at the surrounding pitch-black forest. He didn't know whether it was a bird or a beast that was making strange sounds. After standing there for a while, he turned around, walked back to the bonfire, and sat down. Looking at Ning Kaiqian, who was beside him, Renbaqian thought of the big rock from before. However, Ning Kaiqian's shoulders were only about 1.5 meters tall. Renbaqian reckoned that he wouldn't be able to climb up by stepping on him. After thinking about it, Renbaqian gave up and decided to stay here. The sky had already turned dark, and it was estimated to be around 9 o'clock. It wasn't suitable to wander around in the forest now. Howl! A wolf howled from afar, and the forest became even more eerie at night. Both of them sat by the bonfire in a daze. Feeling bored, Renbaqian chatted with Ning Kaiqian. Most of the time, Ning Kaiqian was talking while Renbaqian was listening. Ning Kaiqian developed his long-winded style and spoke eloquently. Do you think there are ghosts in this world? Renbaqian suddenly asked curiously. Previously, Ning Kaiqian talked about what he had seen and heard along the way. There were many supernatural things, but Renbaqian didn't know whether they were true or not. In any case, he felt like he was talking nonsense. Now both of them were in the wilderness, guarding a bonfire, listening to the howls of wild beasts in the distance. Suddenly, Renbaqian thought of this question. Ning Kaiqian put on a serious face and replied, "Of course there are. When I came here, I passed by a village. There was no one there, and all the doors and windows were tightly shut. I knocked from the end of the village to the end, but no one opened the door. When the sky turned dark, all the villagers opened the door and came out. The whole village was very lively, and all the adults and children were there. In order to welcome a foreigner like me, they even lit a bonfire in the middle of the village, just like the one we have now, but much bigger. Then, they took out all the food they had at home, and the whole village gathered around the bonfire, singing and dancing. From their clothes, I can tell that their families aren't rich. Their children run around naked, but they still took out all the food they had at home." When Ning Kaiqian said this, the bonfire reflected in his eyes seemed to be the scene of that night. His face was filled with nostalgia and a smile. They were really enthusiastic, and the wine they brewed was also very strong. I fell asleep after drinking half a bowl. When he woke up the next day, he found himself lying in the middle of the village. Everything around him had been cleaned up, and the villagers all shut their doors and did not come out. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't find anyone, so I left the village. After walking for half a day, they found another village and asked for water. They also asked about what happened in that village. Guess what? Ning Kaiqian turned around and asked Renbaqian. "Everyone in that village is dead?" Renbaqian guessed. Combining the information from before and after, this should be the case, right? Ning Kaiqian nodded his head vigorously. "Yes, you guessed it right. That village had been wiped out by a plague decades ago. The village I went to later was built by the people who escaped from that village." Is this a story? Renbaqian didn't believe it. Renbaqian had heard this kind of story 1,000 times. "I swear to the heavens that I experienced it personally." Ning Kaiqian immediately swore. Renbaqian looked at him, turned his head away, lowered his head, and used a wooden stick to write and draw on the ground. These were words that he had learned in this world. He drew them for fun when he had nothing to do. He still didn't quite believe Ning Kaiqian's words. This was because, in his impression, oaths were the most unreliable thing. Of course, perhaps the people in this world took oaths very seriously, but he didn't feel much about it. Ning Kaiqian continued. "After that, I specially went to the graveyard next to that village to pay my respects." Renbaqian didn't reply, and he didn't say anything either. He just raised his head and looked at the starry sky. At this moment, Other than the roars of the beasts in the distance, there was only the crackling sound of the bonfire in front of them. After a while, Ning Kaichen poked his arm. Ren Baqian looked up and saw that Ning Saichen's expression was more serious than before. Something is watching us. Where? How do you know? Ren Baqian was puzzled. He turned his head and looked around. Very soon, he knew how Ning Kaichen knew because he also saw something. More than 10 pairs of green eyes were glowing in the dark forest. Ren Baqian slowly got up, raised his crossbow, and asked in a low voice, "What is it?" "They are approaching us. We will know soon." Ning Kaichen did the same action as him. However, Ren Baqian still had a crossbow in his hand. Ning Saichen's hand was empty, so he directly pulled out a burning branch from the bonfire. Ren Baqian was sweating profusely. Encountering wild beasts in the forest in the middle of the night wasn't just bad. What was worse was that it wasn't just one, but a group of them. It was so dark, and the two of them really didn't dare to run around. It was too dangerous, and a single snake could kill them. Moreover, the two of them might not be able to outrun them. Are they afraid of fire? Ren Baqian muttered to himself. Generally speaking, wild beasts were afraid of fire, and it was safer to stay near the bonfire. Furthermore, the bonfire was still blazing, and it gave him some peace of mind. They are out. Following Ning Saichen's words, the figures at the front were revealed. The first to come out were a few large huskies. Or rather, wild wolves. However, they really looked like them. It was just that they were too big. Their shoulder height was almost 1 meter, and they were completely gigantic. Furthermore, the eyes of these wild wolves were filled with cruelty. They opened their mouths slightly, revealing their fangs. It seemed like they were going to treat the two of them as their dinner. Ning Kaichen, if you have any tricks up your sleeves, quickly use them. There are only the two of us now, so don't pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger. Ren Baqian looked at the wild wolves walking out of the forest one after another. His whole body shivered, and he took out his gun with his other hand. Ning Kaichen asked with a serious face, "Deputy Ren, can't you deal with them?" "What do you think? Can't you tell that I have never practiced martial arts before?" Ren Baqian replied unhappily, "I can't even defeat one of them, and now it all depends on you. If you can't do it, both of us will be in the stomach of the wolves today." "I understand." Ning Kaichen nodded his head. Following which, he straightened his body, raised one of his hands, and pointed his 5 fingers toward the sky. He shouted, "Sword come." An inexplicable yet formidable aura rose from his body. Seeing Ning Saichen's actions, Ren Baqian was elated. This Ning Kaichen was indeed pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. With him around, it seemed like they would be safe tonight. Feeling elated, Ren Baqian even had the mood to turn his head to look at Ning Saichen's appearance. He had to admit that Ning Saichen's appearance was pretty good. He had a standard pretty boy face, straightened his body, raised his arm, and shouted, "Sword come." Excluding his ragged clothes, Ren Baqian would give him 8 points for his appearance. After he killed this pack of wolves, Ren Baqian would give him 2 points. 1 minute passed, 2 minutes passed. Ning Kaichen was still in that pose. Ren Baqian was speechless. What's going on? Great Xia is too far away from here, and the sword still needs to fly for a while. Chapter 109. Great Xia is too far away from here. The sword still has to fly for a while. Upon hearing this, Ren Baqian felt as though 10,000 alpacas were galloping wildly in his heart. Can't you defeat these wolves without a sword? Ren Baqian looked at Ning Kaichen, who was still in that pose, and said in a low voice with a hidden bitterness. As for the sword flying over from Great Xia, he felt that it was a fantasy story. However, it was already a critical juncture. He also felt that Ning Kaichen couldn't possibly be full of himself at this point in time, right? Ning Kaichen was still in the pose of grabbing the sky with one hand. Previously, Ren Baqian felt that this pose was worth 8 points, but now he only wanted to give him a slap. "Deputy Ren, I have to trouble you to delay for a while. Without the sword, I am no different from an ordinary person." Ning Kaichen turned around and said to Ren Baqian. Without the sword, he was no different from an ordinary person? Renbachian really didn't know what kind of setting this was. However, he had no other choice now and could only ask, "How long will it take?" According to the distance, it should be about the time it takes to drink 2 cups of tea, Ning Kaichen replied. Damn you, Renbachian cursed angrily. This was really a fraud. Renbachian no longer cared about Ning Kaichen's pose. He raised his crossbow and aimed at the opposite side. The wolves were getting closer. However, they weren't in a hurry to attack. The wolves at the back began to disperse and surround them. Renbachian hesitated for a while. He didn't know whether to strike first and show the wolves how powerful they were, or to delay for as long as possible and wait for Ning Kaichen. If he struck first, the other party might be vigilant, and perhaps he could even injure a few wolves first. This way the pressure would be reduced. Otherwise, if the other party surrounded them and attacked at the same time, the 2 of them would probably be fed to the wolves. If he continued to wait, he would allow the other party to complete the encirclement. How long they could delay for would depend on the deterrent effect of the bonfire. Both methods had their pros and cons. For a moment, Renbachian didn't know what to do. However, he quickly clenched his teeth and forced himself to calm down. This wasn't the time to do nothing when you can't make a decision. At this moment, the nearest wolf was only about 20 meters away from him. He raised his hand, aimed, and immediately shot an arrow. Ow! The wolf at the front howled miserably, as the arrow left a bloody wound on its body. Renbachian hurriedly loaded the arrow and took aim again. While he was doing this, the wolves were a few meters closer. Another arrow shot out, this time hitting the chest of the other wolf, causing it to let out a blood-curdling screech. Looking at the length of the exposed arrow shaft, it was only 4 or 5 centimeters deep. It seemed that the wolf didn't lose its ability to fight. After the 2 arrows were shot, the wolves became even more irritable. Seeing that the other wolves were surrounding him from both sides, Renbachian aimed his pistol at them. He threw the crossbow on the ground with his other hand, and took out a spare magazine from his bag. Pa, pa, pa. Under the night sky, the forest began to emit crisp and short gunshots. 2 wolves burst out with blood. At this moment, all the wolves began to be vigilant. They growled in a low voice and retreated a little, expanding the circle. Renbachian was overjoyed. It seemed like he had done the right thing. As long as they didn't start cultivating immediately, it would be fine if they dragged it out for a while longer. The time taken to brew 2 cups of tea was about 10 minutes, and more than 2 minutes had already passed. She hoped that Ning Kaichen would not stand her up again. Otherwise, she would definitely kill him before she died. Renbachian vigilantly looked at the surrounding wolves. As long as one of them came closer, he would immediately shoot at it, forcing the pack of wolves to retreat. However, even though a few wolves had suffered gunshot wounds, only one wolf fell to the ground and moaned weakly. That wolf had coincidentally been shot in the throat. As for the other wolves, even though their movements were affected after being shot, it didn't seem to be fatal. A few more minutes passed, and the sweat on Renbachian's forehead didn't stop. These wolves were constantly probing him, and after a few minutes, they started to become smarter. Once he raised his hand, they would jump to one side. How much longer? Renbachian couldn't help but ask. 10 more minutes. Deputy Run, hang in there. It's all up to you now. Not only your life, but my life is also in your hands. Ning Kaichen encouraged him. I don't need you to feed me chicken soup, Renbachian couldn't help but whisper. At the same time, he raised his hand and fired another shot. Their patience seems to be getting worse, Renbachian said as he changed the magazine. He had already sensed that the pack of wolves was getting impatient. The surrounding wolves lowered their bodies and growled, giving Renbachian the feeling that they were about to attack. Renbachian clenched his teeth and took out a grenade. Even though he didn't want to use it, he was afraid that others would link him to Lien Baoqing's death. However, in the current situation, he had already used up a magazine, and other than one wolf, the rest of the wolves were injured but not dead. There were a total of 13 wolves surrounding him. If they were to enter the palace together, he was afraid that he would be torn to pieces in an instant. Under such circumstances, he could only rely on the grenade. Not only could it kill a few wolves, but it could also scare them. As for the rest, he would think about it later. If he couldn't get past them now, there would be no future. Renbachien, with a pistol and a grenade in his hand, was in a stalemate with those wolves for another minute. Every minute was like torture for him. There were a few times when he felt that those wolves would pounce on him and tear him to pieces. Seems like I really can't wait any longer. Renbachien thought to himself. There were still 4 minutes left, and these wolves might pounce on him in the next second. It would be too late even if he wanted to throw the grenade. I'll risk it. It doesn't matter if I'm exposed, I have to get past this obstacle first. Renbachien thought to himself and finally made up his mind. He placed the grenade at the side of his mouth, bit on the ring, and exerted force. Following which, he threw the grenade to his left side more than 10 meters away. It landed near 3 wolves. Those wolves only paid attention to it at first, but soon after, they ignored it. Ning Kaichen was on his left side. If those wolves pounced on him, Ning Kaichen would probably be the first to be attacked. Renbachien placed all his hopes on Ning Kaichen, which was why he made such a decision. After throwing the grenade, Renbachien covered his ears with one hand, slightly shrank his neck, and counted in his heart. 1, 2, 3, 4, boom! The grenade exploded at the 5th count, setting off a mass of air waves. 2 wolves were directly blown away like ragged sacks. Their bodies were bleeding from head to toe, and it looked like they were about to die. There was another wolf that was slightly further away. Its body was also wounded and it fell to the ground, whimpering nonstop. The other wolves were shocked by the explosion and retreated with their tails between their legs. At the same time, the death of 2 wolves and the serious injury of 1 wolf shocked them and made them want to retreat. At this moment, Renbachien couldn't care less about them because Ning Kaichen, who was beside him, was still in the same position and had collapsed. At that moment, Renbachien cursed in his heart. Big brother, I'm still counting on you. Don't let anything happen to you. At the same time, fresh blood flowed down from Ning Kaichen's head. Chapter 110. At this moment, Renbachien really wanted to cry but had no tears. His biggest savior, his only hope of surviving for 10 minutes, had been knocked unconscious by his own grenade. What was going on? Didn't this grenade have a killing range of 5 to 10 meters? Ning Kaichen was about 14 to 15 meters away from the killing range. How could he be so unlucky? Renbachien felt that everything was going wrong for him. Ning Kaichen was also a fraud. After posing for so long, he was actually knocked unconscious by a stray bullet. Where is your sword? Where's your demeanor as a master? Now Renbachien began to seriously consider whether these wolves would chase after him, or directly drag Ning Kaichen away if he ran away. Sigh. Renbachien finally sighed faintly. In the end, he was too soft-hearted and felt embarrassed to leave Ning Kaichen behind. Fortunately, the wolves seemed to be frightened and retreated far away. They howled softly from time to time, as if they were communicating with each other. It seemed like he still had some buffer time. Only 1 wolf was still standing in its original spot, glaring fiercely at him. All the other wolves have retreated, but you're the only one who refuses to retreat. What kind of grudge do you have against me? Renbachien looked at the wolf, raised his hand, and aimed at it. Thump! The wolf fell to the ground. I haven't fired yet. What are you doing? Renbachien carefully identified it for a long time before realizing that it was the one that he had shot with an anesthetic arrow at the beginning. It was just that the effects of the medicine were a little slow. He picked up the water bag and poured it on Ning Kaichen's head. A moment later, Ning Kaichen was awakened by the cold water. What just happened? Can you still use your sword? Renbachien was speechless. It was a blessing in disguise that Ning Kaichen did not suffer a concussion. It was interrupted, but it shouldn't be too far from here. I'll summon it again. Ning Kaichen's head was still stained with blood. His current posture was like that of a martyr. He crawled up from the ground and continued to pose. He raised one hand to the sky and shouted, "Sword, come!" Renbachien heaved a sigh of relief. It was good that Ning Kaichen was fine. However, she was even more interested in Ning Kaichen's sword. It even has precision guidance. Furthermore, they had only flown here from Great Xia for 10 minutes. Wasn't that already supersonic? He didn't know that there was such an advanced thing in this world. There were more and more unknowns in this world. Now he could finally relax a little. The surrounding wolves still had no intention of attacking, and were surrounding him from afar. The rest was up to Ning Kaichen. At the thought of this, Renbaqian stuffed the last grenade back into his bag. After a while, Renbaqian heard a loud noise coming from the horizon. It sounded like a fighter jet flying in the sky. A look of joy appeared on Ning Kaichen's face. Sword come. Renbaqian was moved. Such a big commotion? One had to know that this was a sword, not a plane. Planes were loud because they had engines. How did you make such a loud noise? At the same time, many aboriginals looked up at the sky. Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe sat on an open space in the forest. Not far from them was a pile of badly mutilated flesh and blood. From the broken fangs at the side of the pile of flesh and blood, one could tell the identity of this pile of flesh and blood. It was the wild boar that chased Ning Kaichen to the ends of the earth. Are you stupid? How many times have I told you? Now that you've smashed that black fatty into this state, how are you going to report back? The tail or the two fangs? You're going to be laughed at when you get back. It's all your fault. Quan Yonghe used his finger to poke Quan Yonglin's head and gnashed his teeth. Quan Yonglin lowered his head and accepted the lesson. A few more wounds appeared on his body. The deepest wound was on his waist, and it almost cut his abdomen open. At this moment, a loud explosion sounded in the sky. Both of them frowned and looked up. What was that? In the depths of the forest, Hong Xian was sitting on a rock with her eyes closed. She held a long saber in her hand, and was surrounded by babies' corpses. None of them were intact. However, these babies were much bigger than the ones that Renbaqian had seen before. After hearing the sound, Hong Xian opened her eyes and looked up. Her eyes were filled with doubt at first. Then she recalled something that she had heard before and suddenly asked, "Is this a sword slave?" There were many people like them. Du Chongkong was skinning a huge snake that was as thick as his waist. As he was skinning it, he hummed a tune from the mountains. When he heard the explosion in the sky, he looked around in bewilderment. Soon after, he found the source of the sound. At the foot of the mountain, many soldiers also looked up, one by one. The princes from the other three nations came out of their carriages. The Empress was originally eating grapes in the carriage. She had just plucked a grape, and had yet to put it into her mouth when she heard the explosion. She immediately frowned. "Noisy. Give me the bow." She received a simple and crude longbow and a leather quiver from Hong Yuan. She stood up and walked out of the carriage. She raised her head and looked in the direction of the explosion. It was as if she could see through the night sky and see the long sword that was rumbling in the sky. She threw the quiver back and Hong Yuan hurriedly caught it. The Empress knocked an arrow and held a white bone arrow between her fingers. A majestic aura rose from her body. Everyone at the foot of the mountain felt this aura pressing down on their heads. Everyone subconsciously bowed in the direction of the Empress. Only the princes from the other three nations, and some guards tried to resist. Plop! A few people couldn't resist and knelt on the ground. Other than a few who were confident in themselves, the rest also bowed in the direction of the Empress. At this moment, she wasn't just the Empress of Dayo. She was the seventh most powerful expert in the world, Qi Zixiao. Bowing to the seventh most powerful expert in the world was a form of respect from the bottom of their hearts. The Empress pulled the bow to its fullest. The body of the bow was taut like a crescent moon. Then she abruptly let go. When the bowstring rebounded, it produced a loud buzzing sound that reached everyone's ears. However, no one saw the arrow and it didn't make any sound. It disappeared in the Empress's hands just like that. After a while, a loud sound wave was heard. That arrow seemed to have shot through the air, and a series of explosions sounded in the sky. After shooting this arrow, the Empress didn't even look at it, and turned around to return to the carriage. At this moment, there was nothing fancy in the air. It was a long sword that was wrapped in a simple green leather. It was flying at high speed and vibrating as it flew. It resonated with the surrounding air, and created a loud sound wave. At the same time, the body of the sword let out a joyful cry, as if it was happy that its master had summoned it. It was also like a young girl in love who was going to meet her lover. In the next second, a long arrow made of white bone appeared in front of it. With its huge inertia, it couldn't dodge in time. Clang! The two collided, and a crisp and clear sound was heard. That long sword somersaulted countless times in the air before falling to the ground. Only when it was about to land on the ground did it stagger and stabilize its body. It let out a sorrowful cry as it flew shakily toward the mountains. Compared to the momentum it had when it first arrived, one was a young mistress returning home after marrying a tycoon, while the other was a little wife in a commoner's district who was bullied. Ren Baqian was waiting for Ning Caichen's sword to descend from the sky with a brilliant sword aura. He was already considering whether he should hug this thick thigh in time. In his opinion, Ning Caichen was the main character. However, at this moment, a series of explosions sounded in the sky, following which, the sound wave of the long sword disappeared. There was no trace of the long sword that he had expected to fly over with a brilliant sword aura. What's wrong now? Ren Baqian asked subconsciously. Ning Caichen was also perplexed. Strange, why isn't it here yet? Scammer. Ren Baqian couldn't help but curse. Ning Caichen raised his head with a blank look on his face. What exactly was going on? Fortunately, the surrounding wolves didn't have any intention of attacking. After waiting for a few minutes, a long sword finally swayed in the sky and descended as if it was drunk. It actually flew over. But why do I feel that something is amiss? Even if there wasn't a brilliant sword aura, it should at least be a ray of cold light that flew over from the sky, right? Why does it look like it's drunk? This thought emerged in Ren Baqian's mind. Ning Caichen raised his hand, and the long sword swayed as it flew into his hand. When Ning Caichen saw the few cracks on the body of the sword, his face was filled with heartache. When the long sword landed in his hand, it let out a low cry as if it was complaining about its tragic experience. Ning Caichen immediately burst into tears. Seeing his sad look, Ren Baqian couldn't help but ask, "What happened?" Chapter 111. Ren Baqian looked at the shabbily dressed Ning Caichen, who was crying while holding onto the sword. His heart was filled with what the f***ck. Is this even possible? Tonight's drama came one after another. From the sound of the sword, to Ning Caichen being blasted unconscious, to the arrival of the flying sword, the plot was simply full of twists and turns. Although he didn't know where this sword was originally located in Great Xia, Lan City wasn't close to the border. For it to fly here in 10 minutes, it should be at least at the speed of sound, right? Such a small sword that was flying at the speed of sound was actually shot down by an arrow. It gave Ren Baqian the feeling that a fighter jet was shot down by an arrow. It was enough to make the entire earth tremble. Putting aside the fact that this sword could fly by itself and be accurately guided, the fact that it was shot down by an arrow was more shocking to Ren Baqian than the flying sword itself. However, such a thing really happened in front of him. Ren Baqian looked at the sword in Ning Caichen's hand. There was a small dot in the middle of the sword, and there were cracks extending outwards from that dot. It gave people the feeling that this sword would shatter with a light knock. Previously, when this sword came down, there was a rumbling sound in the air. However, after a series of explosions, the rumbling sound disappeared. At this time, the only person who could do such a thing and shoot it down with an arrow was probably the Empress. He didn't know whether the Empress knew how to shoot arrows, but in terms of strength, since she was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, she definitely had the ability to shoot arrows. Thinking of this, Ren Baqian was almost certain that the sword was shot down by the Empress. For example, he had seen Quan Yonglin and Quan Yonghe in action before. Even though they could shock him, it was like comparing heaven and earth to this. Even if other people were stronger than them, they wouldn't be that much stronger. It was also impossible for the Imperial Guards to have such strength. It could only be the Empress, and she was probably in a bad mood. Just like those unlucky people who went to challenge the Empress last year. Thinking of this, Ren Baqian looked at Ning Caichen with some pity. He had to admit that he was really miserable. Even though Ren Baqian didn't understand anything, it wasn't hard to imagine how precious this sword was. When he encountered a life-threatening situation, he summoned the sword over, and actually met the Empress, who was in a bad mood. In the end, he ended up like this. Renbachyan now had the leisure to daydream. Just now, when the sword flew over, those wolves seemed to have sensed something and retreated into the darkness, leaving behind 2 corpses and 2 severely injured wolves. Ning Kaichen cried for a long time before Renbachyan patted him on the shoulder and lamented, "My condolences." Ning Kaichen cried even more miserably when he heard this. Renbachyan felt that it was better to let him cry on his own for a while. It's not a sin for a man to cry. Since Renbachyan had nothing to do, he filled the magazine of his pistol with bullets and sat there in a daze. After a long time, Ning Kaichen finally calmed down. He stroked the blade of the sword with a lifeless look on his face. Renbachyan then asked curiously, "Can this sword be restored? I need a large amount of materials to recover." Ning Kaichen's face was gloomy. "That's good." Renbachyan comforted her. "It's good that you can recover." Ning Kaichen continued to feel depressed. "You are a sword immortal?" Renbachyan asked again. At the very least, the ability to summon a sword from Great Xia with a shout was awesome. "I'm just a sword slave." Ning Kaichen shook his head bitterly. "Why do you say so?" Renbachyan asked curiously. He was still very interested. "You haven't heard of it?" Ning Kaichen turned to look at him. Seeing him nod his head, he lowered his head and stroked the sword again. "There's a sword mountain in this world. There are 3,000 spirit swords on it, and Green Bead is one of them. Every once in a while, a spirit sword will sense the birth of a person who meets the requirements, and will automatically fly out from the sword mountain to the person who meets the requirements. Others call these people chosen by spirit sword masters, and are extremely envious of them. In fact, we are just sword slaves." Renbachyan and Ning Kaichen exchanged questions and answers. Ning Kaichen didn't hide anything about sword masters, and let Renbachyan understand what was going on. Only then did he know that it wasn't easy to be a sword master. Being chosen by a spirit sword was a good thing in a certain sense. One didn't need to practice, and could become a famous expert with a spirit sword in hand. Furthermore, depending on the spirit sword in hand, one's strength would also be different. Among them, the weakest was an earthwill expert, and was even stronger than an ordinary earthwill expert. This was an achievement that most practitioners could only dream of in their lifetime. However, in this world there were gains and losses. This saying couldn't be more true when it came to sword masters. First of all, they couldn't practice. It was unknown whether they were chosen by spirit swords because they had a special constitution that prevented them from practicing. There had never been a sword master who could practice. At most, they could only practice some simple martial arts. Other than that, they were no different from ordinary people. For example, Ning Kaichen was like this. If he had a spirit sword in hand, he would be an expert above the earthwill level. Even most earthwill experts wouldn't be his match. If he didn't have a spirit sword in hand, he was no different from an ordinary person, which was why he was in such a sorry state. Secondly, if a sword master always carried a sword with him, he rarely lived a long life. This was because the spirit sword would absorb the sword master's essence. It wasn't a big deal in a short period of time, but it would damage his lifespan over a long period of time. The earliest sword masters rarely lived more than 40 years old. Therefore, even though others called them sword masters, they generally thought of themselves as sword slaves. As the name suggested, they were like slaves of spirit swords. Even though spirit swords could make them stronger, they had to pay a huge price. Later on, an extremely talented person developed a type of sword nurturing pool. He built a pool according to a specific method, and threw all kinds of precious materials into it to nurture the sword. In this way, apart from reducing the sword master's essence and lifespan, he could also use some special materials to enhance the power of the spirit sword, which was equivalent to increasing the sword master's strength. These materials included minerals, plants, and even the blood of some specific animals. A special liquid was also required. However, the characteristics and preferences of every spirit sword were different. Other than the special liquid used to nurture the sword, the other materials were not the same. Most of the time, the sword master had to personally go to the wilderness to try his luck and find materials that matched the spirit sword. Because the two materials were actually companions, the sword master would immediately know when he found a suitable material. Ning Xiqin's spirit sword was nurtured in the sword nurturing pool. If he encountered any danger, he could just summon the spirit sword. If he was near the sword nurturing pool, the spirit sword could reach him in an instant. He came to Dayo to look for opportunities and exchange some things. He didn't expect to be so unlucky. Green bead was shot down by an arrow just as it was about to reach him. Furthermore, it was so badly damaged that he didn't know how long it would take for it to recover. It could be said that he lost everything. No wonder Ning Qiqin looked like he had nothing to live for. Ignoring the downcast Ning Qiqin, Renbaqian felt that this world was getting more and more exciting. There were too many unknowns in this world and too many places that made Renbaqian feel mysterious. The veil on the surface of this world was already so exciting. Renbaqian didn't know what else was underneath. Chapter 112. Where is the Sword Mountain? Renbaqian asked. No one knows. Every sword slave knows that there is such a sword mountain. Countless people want to explore it, but no one has ever found it, Ning Qiqin replied. Renbaqian thought about it, and felt that this world needed a satellite. It was a pity that he didn't have money. He felt that he would eventually have money. However, he couldn't bring such a big thing over. At the very least, he didn't bring his bed over. He didn't know if it was because of the mattress and bed sheets, but he always brought the bed sheets over and back. However, it was useless even if he brought them over. There was no launching device, no operating platform, and no debugging staff. How was he going to launch the satellite into the sky? Do spirit swords always choose newborn children? Most of the time. Some people get it later, but it's rare. Are spirit swords alive? Renbaqian had always been curious about this. They are also alive, but they are different from us. The sword slaves could empathize with the pain and suffering they had suffered. If they are destroyed, the sword slaves will die too. Ning Qiqin stroked the sword. The green bead trembled slightly as if it was communicating with him. They can feel the pain when they are hurt? Of course, they will convey their inner feelings to the sword slaves. For example, I feel pain all over my body now. Ning Qiqin continued to look aggrieved. Renbaqian felt that half of his expression was due to the pain. How many sword masters are there? I'm not sure. Usually, there are only about 100 of them. Only when the world is in chaos will more sword masters be born. According to records, thousands of years ago, there were thousands of sword masters in the world at the same time. That was a magnificent era. Countless heroes moved unhindered in the world. Just thinking about it makes one fascinated. Speaking of that magnificent era, Ning Xiqin's eyes lit up. He had always yearned for that era. However, when he thought of the green bead being shot down halfway, he immediately lost all his thoughts. His eyes dimmed, and his whole body emitted a miserable feeling. Renbaqian was filled with fantasies and expectations for this world while Ning Qiqin was dejected. The aboriginals on the mountain continued to do what they were supposed to do. Some people thought of something from the voice just now, but most of them didn't understand. Nowadays, the sword master rarely appeared. Most of them were in Great Xia, so the aboriginals didn't know much about him. Everyone at the foot of the mountain also went back to rest. Many of them had guessed what the sound was, but they didn't know what happened after Qi Zixiao shot that arrow. His guess was that someone was unlucky. The Empress was reclining in the carriage with a thick layer of animal skin under her. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan were massaging her legs and shoulders respectively. The Empress was drinking wine by herself. Your Majesty, what was that sound just now? Hong Yuan asked softly. As the Empress's maid, she was experienced and knowledgeable, but she was still very curious about the situation just now. Hearing Hong Yuan's question, Qing Yuan also pricked up her ears. It's just a small bug. It's too noisy and disturbed me, the Empress said casually. Seeing that the Empress wasn't going to say much, the two of them didn't probe further. If Ning Qiqin and Green Bead heard what the Empress said, they would probably be heartbroken. If Green Bead was a little more low-key and didn't nag so much, she probably wouldn't be in such a miserable state now. Whether it was as a person or as a sword, sometimes it was better to keep a low profile. Nothing else happened that night. After going through all kinds of things for the day, Renbachian was already extremely tired. In the middle of the night, he added some branches to the bonfire, leaving Ning Kaichen, whose entire body was in pain, to lie on the ground and fall asleep. His body was covered with pebbles. After lying on the ground for a long time, his entire body was in pain. Even so, he didn't care anymore. It was obvious that the events of the day had caused him to be exhausted. His body was tired, and so was his heart. Renbachian was awoken by the cold. The sky was already bright, and a layer of white fog had risen in the surroundings. He sat up from the ground and realized that the water vapor in the forest had wet his clothes. The bonfire had also been extinguished. No wonder it was so cold. Ning Kaichen was hugging his sword. His eyes were already closed, but his eyebrows were still tightly knitted. Renbachian got up and tried to search the bonfire. There wasn't a single spark, and he couldn't be bothered to torment himself. He just hugged his arms and waited for daybreak. Thinking that he would be able to leave the mountain in a while, Renbachian felt elated. The most dangerous night was finally over. After an hour, Ning Kaichen woke up as well. After waking up this time, she was more or less normal. At least, she didn't look like a resentful woman anymore. Wait a while more. Start a fire and cook something to eat. After that, we will leave the mountain before noon, Renbachian said. Ning Kaichen nodded his head and continued to hug his sword. When the sun rose from afar, the fog in the mountain had lessened. Renbachian then went to the surrounding area to pick up some tree branches. He started a fire and roasted the meat. When the meat was done, it was already 7 or 8 o'clock. Both of them ate a simple meal and got up to leave the mountain. Renbachian was still holding a crossbow in one hand and a tree branch in the other, alerting the enemy in the forest. On the other hand, Ning Kaichen was hugging his sword with both hands, looking like a sunset warrior as he followed behind him. Renbachian walked along the stream. When he saw the stall of Lao Gan Ma from yesterday, Renbachian's gaze swept across it. Immediately, he ran over and used a tree branch to search the stall. Soon after, he carefully took out something from the stall. When Ning Kaichen saw the thing in Renbachian's hand, a disgusted look appeared on his face. Renbachian didn't dislike it. If he didn't see wrongly, this should be that thing, right? The saber-toothed tiger's penis could also be considered as a tiger's penis, right? This good thing wasn't smashed. He was really lucky. He could take it back and give it to Chen Qing. That guy should need this treasure. At this moment, on the way down the mountain, Renbachian didn't have the same look of bitterness and hatred as yesterday. Instead, he started to think about other things. After washing it in the stream, Renbachian started to think about how to bring it back. He couldn't carry it in his hands. There were some other things in his waist bag. If he put this thing in, it would get dirty. Brother, help me carry it down the mountain. I can't carry it in my hands. Renbachian put on a smile and asked Ning Kaichen. Ning Kaichen's face twitched. His head was like a rattle drum. Renbachian saw that Ning Kaichen wouldn't touch it even if he killed him. He couldn't bear to throw it away either. Hence, he tore a strip of cloth from his body and rolled it up before stuffing it into his waist bag. Originally, his clothes were torn in many places in the forest. Furthermore, he tore it twice. At this moment, he looked like a beggar. He and the ragged Ning Kaichen were like a pair of brothers in hardship. The path down the mountain was much easier than going up the mountain. After walking for a while, they started to see figures. Du Chongkong was carrying a mace on his back. He was holding a ball in both his hands and sprinting away. His speed was quite fast. Before Renbachian could say anything, Du Chongkong had already run far away. Not long after, Renbachian saw someone carrying a toothed tiger that had already died. It was one size bigger than the one from yesterday. However, its head was smashed like a sakama. When Renbachian saw the many mounts and carriages at the edge of the forest, tears started to well up in his eyes. He finally got out of this godforsaken forest alive. At the foot of the mountain, he saw that the nearby open space was filled with all kinds of prey. There was even someone recording at the side. The two of them came out empty-handed. When the others saw them, they didn't care. Quan Yonghe and Quan Yonglin came out from behind them. Kuan Yonghe's face was filled with unhappiness while Kuan Yonglin was laughing dryly. The two of them were also empty-handed. Kuan Yonglin had a few more wounds on his body, especially his waist. It was dyed red with blood. Renbaqian turned around and looked at the two of them. Needless to say, even if they encountered prey, they would have been smashed into smithereens by Kuan Yonglin. Without caring about anything else, Renbaqian ran to report to the Empress in his dirty clothes. This time, it was a form of punishment for him to spend the night on the mountain. Only by making himself look more miserable would people sympathize with him. Your Majesty, I almost couldn't make it back this time. Upon seeing the Empress, Renbaqian immediately started to lament. Chapter 113. Why do I remember that Deputy Run went on a killing spree? The Empress's cold voice was heard. Renbaqian froze. What did the Empress mean? Did she know that he killed Lian Baoqing? Otherwise, why would she say such a thing? Renbaqian's mind was filled with thoughts. At this moment he didn't know how to reply. The Empress's following words made him feel as if he had been granted amnesty. Forget it, I won't hold you responsible for this matter. Go and tidy up. You have embarrassed yourself by looking like this, the Empress continued. Thank you, Your Majesty. Renbaqian quickly retreated, and didn't dare to mention anything else. After he left, Renbaqian was almost certain that the Empress already knew about it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have said those last words. In that case, he could be considered worry-free, and others wouldn't dig it out in the future. Naturally, he didn't know that the Empress already knew what he had done. After he left, the Empress thought of how Renbaqian came in with a miserable appearance and complained tearfully. Then he was frightened by her words. She found it amusing and laughed. What a crafty fellow. I have to knock him down a peg. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan looked at each other with smiles on their faces. When other people saw the Empress, they would tidy up cleanly. Who would come crying miserably like Deputy Ren? However, it was a good thing that Her Majesty wasn't in a bad mood every time she saw Deputy Ren. Following which, the Empress called Xianja over and said, if anyone asks about Lian Baoqing, just say that he overestimated himself and provoked a ferocious beast, causing his corpse to be swallowed. It was just an aristocratic family from Great Xia. They could even kill the envoy from the Yun nation, so why would they care about an aristocratic family from Great Xia? She was even a little interested in the tool that Wu Fang mentioned that Renbaqian used at that time. With her strength, she naturally wouldn't care about this kind of thing. Furthermore, from Wu Fang's description, she knew that this kind of thing was difficult to mass-produce. In that case, it wouldn't be as useful as some swords and sabers. However, this storyteller Ren really had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. Everyone's mounts were watched by the stream. Renbaqian's mount Engazing Bird was pushed to the outermost and was far away. The main reason was that there were many ferocious beasts, and it would tremble whenever it got close. Renbaqian went to the stream to wash himself. Then, he went to the side and took down the sleeping bag from the Mount Engazing Bird. His official robe was placed inside. After changing into his official robes, Renbaqian looked much more refreshed. After changing his clothes, he lay on the grass for a short while before he was called to roast some meat for the Empress. He also roasted a piece of meat for himself. At this time, the people on the mountain gradually came down. At the same time, the top 3 of the Great Hunt had been selected. The first one was called Tao Meng, and the prey he brought back was a creature with horns on its head that looked like a leopard. It was called the Guardian Beast, and it was said that it specialized in guarding strange flowers and plants. It was as fast as lightning, and its strength was not small either. For example, saber-toothed tigers and the like were its food. Many people asked Tao Meng what good items he had found. After all, if he had hunted down a guardian, he would definitely have taken whatever it was guarding. The second one was Shiwanya, who brought back a monkey with golden fur all over its body. It was about 2/3 the size of a human, and it was still alive. It was tied up tightly. From the tone of the others, this monkey was also very powerful and could understand human nature. If he was nurtured well, he would be a good helper in the future. The third was Hong Wu's granddaughter Hong Xian. Renbaqian roasted the meat while watching the bustle. After the rankings were finalized and presented to the Empress, everyone started to prepare lunch and pack up their things at the same time. After lunch, everyone started to return. Along the way, someone mentioned that Lian Baoqing of the Lian family was missing. Previously, some people thought that he was thinking about the reward given by the Empress, so he brought an Earthwill-level bodyguard to the mountains to hunt. After all, he had always been arrogant, so it was not strange for him to do such a thing. However, he had not appeared yet, and everyone felt that something was amiss. He overestimated himself and challenged the beast. Even his bodyguard was swallowed by it. Xianzhu announced to everyone. After hearing this, even if some people felt that something was amiss, they didn't say anything more. After all, he wasn't related to Lian Baoqing. Dayo had already given this explanation. Regardless of what was going on behind his back, it was the Lian family's business. They didn't know if the Lian family, which had always been domineering, would swallow this loss. Even if they didn't want to eat it, there was nothing they could do. Did they really dare to ask Qi Zixiao to give them an explanation? After hearing this, Renbaqian was once again sure that the Empress already knew about what happened in the forest. Otherwise, Xianzhu wouldn't have said this. It was obvious that the Empress had suppressed the matter. After all, Xianzhu had come forward to explain that in the future, they would look for the Empress if they had any problems. This outcome made him heave a sigh of relief. In the future, no one would dig up this matter. Otherwise, it would be a slap to the Empress's face. Otherwise, if the Lian family knew the truth, even though he wouldn't dare to do anything in Dayo, they would just have to send a few assassins to deal with him, and he would be in big trouble. At this moment, Renbaqian was rather grateful. There weren't many leaders who could take the blame for their subordinates. This thigh was indeed the right one to hug. In the afternoon, everyone returned to Lan City. There wasn't anyone to welcome them, but when the Empress's carriage entered the city, there were still many aboriginal commoners cheering at the side. When everyone arrived at the plaza in front of the palace, the Empress's carriage directly entered the palace. Only then did everyone disperse in twos and threes. Renbaqian didn't care about anything else and directly returned to the Beast Park. When he saw Tian Tian and Gungun, he hugged them and rubbed his face against them. It was great to be back. After a while, Renbaqian put the things back into the house with a claw mark on his face. However, before he could even sit down, he was called into the palace. "Do you remember that you said you prepared 2 menus?" the Empress asked. "Yes." Renbaqian lowered his head and replied. Even though he was very grateful to the Empress in the afternoon, he still felt a little guilty now. "Let's just choose the unusual menu. These people are too daring. They dare to do anything," the Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Renbaqian complied and immediately retreated. He only heaved a sigh of relief when he was outside. He pondered in his heart, those people shouldn't have committed any crimes recently, right? Even though there were some small scuffles, they shouldn't have committed any major crimes. Why did the Empress find them an eyesore? Renbaqian pondered for a long time. Could it be that Lian Baoqing tried to assassinate him? After thinking about it, it was highly possible. Hearing the Empress say that she didn't blame him, the Empress should be very clear about the situation at that time. To assassinate a Dayo official right under the eyes of the Empress, this wasn't just bold. It was practically soaring to the heavens. Now that Lian Baoqing was dead, the Empress directly vented her anger on others. Renbaqian felt that this was the most likely reason. Or it could be that he didn't know what happened on the day he returned to Earth to buy a gun. However, there were still the big shots in the imperial court. The Empress didn't say that she was going to cook 2 types of banquet dishes. In that case, the big shots in the imperial court would also cook the same dishes. He must never let them know that he was the one who designed the menu. Otherwise, it would be hard to guarantee that he wouldn't make things difficult for himself. Renbaqian pondered as he arrived at the entrance of the imperial kitchen. He simply didn't want to think about it anymore. In any case, whatever the Empress said would be the same. When everyone in the imperial kitchen saw Renbaqian, they greeted one after another. "Brother Ren. The menu has been decided. It's the second set of dishes. That interesting dish will be used tomorrow." Are the ingredients ready? Renbachian asked. When the others heard this, they revealed a look of anticipation. I can get someone to send it over anytime, Caretaker Go said in a deep voice. The corner of his mouth twitched slightly. Chapter 114. After Renbachian left the palace, another person entered the palace. He was about 40 to 50 years old and looked very ordinary. He was the kind of person that would be hard to spot in a crowd. He was wearing ordinary clothes made of coarse cloth. His height was average among the aboriginals, about 1.7 meters. However, he stood there like a towering mountain, giving off an unshakable vibe. Your Majesty! The burly man cupped his fists and shouted loudly. Someone, give the general-in-chief who supports the nation a seat of honor. The Empress had a rare gentle smile on her face. All these years, she only behaved like this when she saw the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hongwu. The Empress was only 16 years old when she ascended to the throne. It was very difficult for a 16-year-old girl to sit in this position. Countless people in Dayo, Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chun nation stared at her. At that time, her strength was far from being able to look down on the world. It was all thanks to the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hongwu, that she was able to secure her position. The general-in-chief who supports the nation was conferred by the late emperor. From this, one could see the late emperor's expectations of Hongwu. Hongwu did not disappoint the late emperor. Therefore, to the Empress, Hongwu was like an uncle and the only person she could rely on. 7 years had passed, and this relationship had been preserved until now. Every year, when the Empress celebrated her birthday, Hongwu would come to the palace for a chat after returning from the north. To the Empress, this was a rare moment of warmth. Your Majesty is getting more and more powerful, and I am also getting older. Hongwu smiled after sitting down. He looked at the Empress with a gentle gaze that even Hong Xian rarely saw. The general-in-chief is no different from 10 years ago. The Empress smiled as she sat on the couch. Qing Luan, fill up the general-in-chief's cup. Hongwu said, even though my face hasn't changed, time is unforgiving. I am indeed old. Then, he took the cup and drank it in one gulp while laughing heartily. Thank you for the wine, Your Majesty. Fill it up again. This cup is for the general-in-chief. Great Xia only dared not act rashly, because you were stationed in the north. Great Xia has worked hard and made great contributions. The Empress finished speaking and drank the wine in one gulp. After the toast, the two of them began to talk about other things. I feel that Great Xia will not be content with their lot in the future. The emperor of the Great Xia dynasty is very ambitious. After ascending to the throne, he has been working hard for many years. Now that the strength of the Great Xia dynasty is far greater than before, I'm afraid he has some ideas, Hongwu said. Then he said with some regret, back then before he succeeded the throne, I wanted to kill him at the border. Unfortunately, he escaped. The Empress nodded her head slightly and said, I'm afraid that they are making preparations. I'm afraid we'll have to trouble Great General next. If Renbachian heard their conversation, he would know why Great Xia sent that white bear over. Although Great Xia has a large number of elite soldiers, the aboriginal warriors aren't afraid of them. If they come, I'll show them what I've got. Hongwu said heroically. I will send an order to the mountains to recruit 20,000 soldiers. The Empress nodded. One had to know that even the ordinary aboriginal warriors weren't weak. After undergoing training, their strength far surpassed that of the elite soldiers of Great Xia. In terms of individual strength, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that he could fight against 20 people alone. Furthermore, this was under the circumstances that Dayo lacked armor and weapons. However, a duel in the army wasn't a simple matter. Currently, Dayo had a total of 90,000 soldiers. Among them, 15,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the South guarded the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation. 20,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the Northeast guarded the border with the Yun Nation. 15,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the Southeast guarded the border with the Chun Nation. 30,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the North guarded the border with Great Xia in the north. The remaining 20,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the South guarded the whole of Dayo. However, these 100,000 elite soldiers were the foundation of Dayo over the years. It could be said that all the taxes collected by Dayo in the south were used to support these 100,000 elite soldiers. The most elite soldiers were the 30,000 elite soldiers from the Protectorate of the North. However, the equipment of these 30,000 elite soldiers was far inferior to that of Great Xia's. They completely relied on their valiant individual strength to firmly suppress the 200,000 soldiers on the opposite side. However, if Great Xia really wanted to attack Dayo, they could deploy at least 500,000 soldiers. 30,000 soldiers against 500,000 soldiers. Their equipment were inferior to that of the other party. Furthermore, under the circumstances that they were defending, even Hongwu couldn't do anything. After all, the other party could choose to break through in any direction, but it was impossible for Hongwu to defend only one place. Now that the Empress had recruited another 20,000 soldiers, Hongwu could have more cards in his hands. At least, he could maintain a considerable number of soldiers at each pass. This was already the best she could do. It was difficult to equip the weapons of these 20,000 soldiers in a short period of time. Great Xia's storehouse could be said to be poor. However, she immediately thought of Ren Baqian. This fellow had a lot of tricks up his sleeves and knew a lot of things. She wondered if he could be of some use in this aspect. In fact, Ren Baqian had mentioned smelting a few times before. However, he was usually referring to forging. The Empress didn't understand what he meant and didn't take it to heart. If Ren Baqian had said from the start that he could smelt more iron and forge more weapons, he wouldn't have been nearly killed. Now the Empress thought that it would be best if Ren Baqian could be of some help in this aspect. Even if he couldn't, he could get some other things out and use the channels to exchange for some weapons from the Yun Nation and the Chun Nation. At present, he should still be able to get some from the Yun Nation and the Chun Nation. If Great Xia really made a move, she was afraid that it would be really difficult to get more from the outside world. Not only weapons, but salt, rations, and the like were also the same. Fortunately, Great Xia should still be in the preparatory stage and there was still some time. Your Majesty, you have to pay attention to the Yun Nation and the Chun Nation, Hongwu said again. The Empress nodded. She understood that Dayo was different from the other three nations because the aboriginals were different from them. Naturally, the nations that they established were different as well. It was just like a wolf sneaking into a flock of sheep. The Yun Nation and the Chun Nation had been feeling uneasy about Dayo for a long time. Dayo even almost attacked the capital of the Yun Nation. If Great Xia wanted to send troops, it was impossible that they didn't send people to contact them first. If the Yun Nation and the Chun Nation attacked together, it would indeed be somewhat dangerous. After talking about national affairs, Hongwu and the Empress talked about other things. Most of them talked about the past and reminisced about the past. Both of them chatted rather happily and laughed out loud from time to time. Just as the Empress was in high spirits, Hongwu looked at her and sighed. Great General, what's the matter? The Empress asked. Hongwu had always been like a tall mountain that everyone looked up to. She had never seen him sigh like this before. Your Majesty ascended the throne at the age of 16. It has been 7 years since then. And you have grown from a frail young lady to an empress that is praised by the people of the world. I am very gratified to see that your Majesty has grown over the years. However, your Majesty is now 23 years old, and you have to have a descendant. When Hongwu said this, he immediately turned into an old man who was worried about his wife. He even brought up his seniority. The Empress's face immediately turned ugly. The year before last, Hongwu used all kinds of methods to celebrate her birthday. This year he changed to playing the emotional card. She shouldn't have asked him that question, and let him perform his own one-man show. Your Majesty, I don't have many years left. Before I leave, I still want to see your Majesty get married. Besides, I am not the only one who is anxious. The entire imperial court is anxious. Hongwu continued to sigh. He sighed while looking at the Empress's face. He wasn't even so worried about his own granddaughter. However, he couldn't not worry about the person in front of him. Back then, the former emperor entrusted his granddaughter to him. Now the Empress was doing well in other aspects, was stronger than him, and was doing well in other areas. However, he still couldn't let go of this matter. Outsiders would never think that the number 9 in the world and number 7 in the world would actually sit together to discuss this matter. The Empress immediately frowned. Originally, she was in a good mood when she saw Hongwu. It was also very heartwarming to talk about the past with him. But her mood immediately turned sour when he mentioned this matter. If it wasn't for the fact that Hongwu was in front of her, she would have directly thrown him out. 2 days ago, everyone in the imperial court had talked about this matter. Today Hongwu brought it up again, which really annoyed her. Chapter 115. I started writing in May last year, and this is my second book. How should I put it? People who write books have a story in their hearts that they want to describe and tell people. Every book is a magnificent world, and it's all about love and hate. It's the same for this book. To be honest, the opening of this book wasn't smooth. The editor told me bluntly that this type of book is more difficult to produce results. There have been books with this style in the past, but they didn't have good results. However, I have such a story in my heart, such a character, and I want to tell her. Therefore, in the end, I insisted on my own ideas and wrote this book. After publishing the book, the results weren't too good at first. I was quite nervous, afraid that it would fail. After all, telling the story I wanted to tell was out of feelings, but feelings can't be eaten. I still have to support my family. Up until now, this book has done a lot better than I expected at the beginning, which made me relieved. I can continue to tell this story that I like. First of all, I would like to thank all my friends for their support. Without your support, I definitely wouldn't have been able to persevere. I have mentioned the reason before. Secondly, I would like to thank the editor, Wudong. Although he wasn't very optimistic about this theme, he didn't reduce the support he gave me and gave me enough recommendation spots. Now I have close to 38,000 subscribers. It's time to check the results when it goes on sale tomorrow. I'm taking more than 30,000 subscribers. You won't embarrass me too much, right? If the subscription ratio is too low, I really won't have the face to see others. I hope that all my friends can support me if possible. Only by supporting the original can there be people immersed in fantasy telling stories that they like, instead of following the trend for money. Speaking of the issue of updating, this book is taking much longer than I expected. Maybe I care too much about it, so I keep writing and deleting, causing the speed to be unable to speed up. I only have the next day's draft in my hands every day. I'll give it my all when it goes on sale tomorrow. I'll guarantee 5 chapters at least. If the initial subscriptions exceed my expectations and reach 3,000 subscribers, I'll add 2 more chapters. The Alliance leader will add 4 chapters, the sect leader will add 2 chapters, and the 3 branch leaders will add 1 chapter. That's about it. If I can't add them tomorrow, I'll continue adding them the day after, and the day after that, until I make up for the number. Chapter 116. The next day, Renbaqian strolled to the Honglu Bureau early in the morning. The Empress's birthday celebration was today. After that, his mission would be considered complete. He really did not have much interest in the position of Honglu deputy. When he returned to Earth at night, he would bring back some good stuff. At that time, he would look for Du Changkong to exchange for martial arts. Who knows, he might be able to become an expert or something. He was looking forward to the cultivation techniques of this world. Now he could only hope that he could learn the cultivation techniques of this world. After all, people from 2 different worlds might have some differences in their bodies. That would be terrible. Qi Heng and Qi Sheng, who were guarding the door, were still respectful towards Renbaqian. Even though it wasn't a secret that Renbaqian was only hanging here temporarily, Renbaqian had indeed done a good job in the Honglu Bureau. These days, there weren't many troubles at the Honglu Bureau. As a result, the people at the Honglu Bureau were rather respectful towards Renbaqian. Renbaqian was rather pleased with the attitude of the people in the Honglu Bureau. However, the Aboriginals were well aware of their own situation. In reality, The Aboriginals were overbearing but not ruthless enough. Even though it was a deterrent to the people from other nations, they wouldn't be too heavy-handed since they were here to celebrate the Empress's birthday. In addition, Qiji's own strength was very high, so he could easily deal with the other party. He just had to beat them until they were convinced. That was why he had broken the legs of 4 people last year, but he was still playing tricks on them. However, Rinpochian was different. He did not have the strength to truss a chicken, and did not have any foundation in Dayo. If he could not suppress them, he was afraid that he would have to revolve around them every day. He would not be able to get any benefits from the Empress either. The ruthless methods he used and the even more unscrupulous behavior he displayed afterwards were the real reason why they tucked their tails between their legs. It didn't mean that he was much better at handling things than the original Qiji. Rinpochian returned to his room. Not long after, someone came over and handed Rinpochian a token. This was the name list for tonight's banquet. The other people who were invited to attend the banquet had already received the token. Rinpochian was the only one who had gone missing for a day, and then went to participate in the great hunt. This token was only given to him today. Rinpochian fiddled with the token. He had already prepared the gift for the Empress. The last time he came back, he had also brought it back. There shouldn't be any problem. On Earth, it was not expensive, but here, it should be high-end and of a higher grade. It was not inferior to the precious items given by others. Furthermore, there was an exceptional bootlicker attached to the gift. He reckoned that the Empress would like it. After sitting for a while, Rinpochian recalled that no one had told him what to wear. He got up and went to Gu Daxiong's room. He heard a deafening snoring at the door. It was really comfortable being a hands-off shopkeeper. This period of time was the most troublesome in the past years, but this year, he had nothing to do with it. Sir Gu. Rinpochian knocked on the door and shouted. A moment later, a voice came from inside. What's the matter? Come in. When Rinpochian entered, Gu Daxiong was sitting on a chair with his arms crossed. Sir Gu, may I know what to wear to the banquet? Rinpochian cupped his fists and asked. Gu Daxiong scratched his head. Of course it's the gown. Soon after, he remembered that Rinpochian didn't know much about these things, so he said, Go to Jingyang Road and look for a Guji clothing store. You can make formal attire there. You are now secondary class, rank 6, and the color is grass green. Thank you, Sir Gu, but can you get someone to bring me there? Rinpochian asked again. Fortunately, he had asked. Otherwise, he wouldn't have known that Dayo had gowns, let alone where to get one. He hoped that there would be ready-made clothes in the clothing store so that he wouldn't be held up. Look for Gu Shou and get him to get someone to bring you there. Gu Daxiong waved his hand and yawned. A moment later, Rinpochian was led by someone to the entrance of a shop on Jingyang Road. Deputy Run, this is the place. Tell them your position and they will know. The person who led the way said to Rinpochian and left in a hurry. There weren't many people in the shop. Some ready-made clothes were hung on the rack. After all, the others were already prepared. No one was like Rinpochian, who participated in the exercise at night, and came to make the formal attire in the afternoon. There were 2 Aboriginal ladies leaning on the counter. There was a burly man sitting beside them. When they saw Rinpochian enter in his official attire, the 2 ladies immediately perked up. Sir, what do you want to buy? Formal attire for the banquet. Can you make it? Rinpochian asked. I just need to make some alterations. It will be ready in 4 hours. One of the ladies said, Sir, please follow me. It was around 9 in the morning. 4 hours was equivalent to 1 in the afternoon. He could make it in time. After Rinpochian entered, there was a lady who was either from the Yun Nation, the Chun Nation, or Great Xia. She was standing at one side with a ruler in her hand. Rinpochian stretched out his arm and allowed her to measure his measurements. He was trying to guess which country this lady was from. After all, the people from those 3 countries were similar. Only the people from the Chun Nation were slightly darker. There was also a possibility that she was a remnant citizen of the Hao Nation. In fact, the Aboriginals didn't look much different from them. They were just a little more boorish. The difference in body size was huge. After explaining his position, Renbachyan left and returned to the Honglu bureau. He stayed there until the afternoon before collecting his formal attire and returning to the Beast Park. Daeyeo's formal attire was very simple and didn't have many decorations. It was just a buttoned robe with the left side pressing down on the right side and extending all the way to the armpit. The buttoned and cuffs were all made of red cloth with floral patterns. Other than the buttoned front, waist, and cuffs, this formal attire was entirely green. The lower part of the attire was a little lower than the knees, and a pair of green pants were required. Other things didn't matter to Renbachyan, but the color of this formal attire gave him a headache. Even if it was dark green, it would be good. After wearing this formal attire, he immediately felt that he was as green as the prairie of Hohot. Renbachyan carried out a wooden box that was half the height of a person. The box was made of wood and was wrapped in craft paper. The surrounding area was wrapped with soft paper. This was the birthday gift for the Empress. After checking the items, Renbachyan went out and wandered around. He found Tai Dao and Ting Hulu. When they saw him, they praised him. "Sir Ren, you look really handsome in this formal attire. Stop flattering me. In a while, the two of you will change into clean clothes and help me move these things to the front gate of the palace," Renbachyan said. He was already so green. How could he still call himself handsome? "Yes, sir." The two immediately nodded their heads. Then they asked curiously, "Sir, I didn't see you preparing anything for Her Majesty. I thought you would go empty-handed." "Naturally, I have already prepared it." Renbachyan waved his hand. "The two of you go and change your clothes." When it was almost evening, Renbachyan brought Tai Dao and Tung Hulu to the front gate of the palace. There were already a few carriages parked at the side of the plaza. In front of the palace gate, there were already a few rows of imperial bodyguards forming a human wall. There were two paths in the human wall. The officials of Daeyeo and the officials from the other three nations were separated when they entered. Chapter 117. Before Renbachyan arrived, there were already some people there. A few men dressed in red and purple ceremonial robes entered the palace without stopping. Some of the attendants recorded the gifts and waited outside the palace. Renbachyan listened to a few of them. When those attendants wrote down their gifts, they would read them out loud. For example, 13 warm sungrass, 1 heaven-grade weapon, and so on. After waiting for a while, Renbachyan pondered for a while writing down his gifts. Not to mention the people from the other three nations, just the officials of the imperial court alone would probably send a lot of gifts. In addition to the gifts brought by the people from the other three nations, the number of gifts would probably be huge. It was impossible for the Empress to look through everyone's gifts. At most, she would choose the ones that she was interested in to look at. The rest would be directly sent to the imperial treasury. As such, how the gifts were written was very important. After all, if these things were not sent to the Empress, then they would not be able to curry favor with her. Other people's gifts could be more ordinary. After all, with their status, it didn't matter if their gifts were outstanding. As long as they weren't too shabby, it would be fine. However, Renbachyan was different from all the other Daeyeo officials. After he reported his name, the surrounding people looked at Renbachyan in astonishment. However, he was after all a secondary class, rank 6 official. Naturally, no one said anything. They just felt that he was being too arrogant. After writing down the gifts, someone would naturally send the items to the palace. As for the list of gifts, the Empress would look through it. Renbachyan waved his hand at Tai Dao and Tung Hulu, indicating that they could go back first. He then walked into the palace. There was a maid leading the way in front. Not far away, there were other people following the maid. Renbachyan did not look around and obediently followed them to the front of an unfamiliar huge palace. At this moment, there were 2 rows of tables in the palace. What Renbachyan liked was that there were 2 chairs behind each table. It was much more comfortable than kneeling in ancient costume dramas. There weren't many people inside. On the left side of the palace hall, there were several burly men with short hair or bald heads talking and laughing loudly. The voices were very messy. On the opposite side, a few people from the other 3 nations had arrived. They were all sitting at the tables with their eyes closed. Ren Baqian did not attract much attention when he entered. His seat was the outermost on the left side near the main door. After being led to his seat, he thanked the maid and sat in his seat in a daze. Next, he saw many big shots in the imperial court, but he didn't recognize any of them. The big shots of the imperial court who came later were mostly men with short hair or bald heads, and they all had strong bodies. The women, on the other hand, all looked very valiant. They were also dressed in formal attire, but it was more complicated than the men's. The female officials in Dayo weren't like those in ancient China, who were all in the palace. The proportion of female officials in the outer court of Dayo wasn't low. After all, the Empress was the strongest in Dayo, and the Aboriginal women weren't necessarily weaker than the men. However, Aboriginal women were mostly officials in the Ministry of Revenue and the Ministry of Appointments. They were in charge of taxation and official assessments. Very few of them joined the army. Lu Ruiyao's mother was the imperial treasurer, in charge of money and grain. Not long after, Mr. Emptiness, Ning Kaichen, and the others also arrived. Ning Kaichen did not know where his spirit sword was. In any case, he came alone. It was the same for Mr. Emptiness. He did not bring any of the four beauties with him. What made Ren Baqian slightly surprised was that Ning Kaichen was actually sitting in the middle of the hall, slightly in front, while Mr. Emptiness was sitting in the middle and slightly behind. Both of them were only 7 or 8 seats apart. As time passed, the empty hall began to fill up, but the seats of honor on both sides were still empty. The people who came next were the real big shots, such as the second elder. There were 3 empty seats at the very front. Other than the second elder, there was still one more seat, but no one knew who it was. Next, the 7th Prince of Great Xia arrived. This time around, he was the guest of honor from the 3 nations. Naturally, he was seated in the seat of honor on the right side. After the 7th Prince came in, he immediately cast his gaze in Ren Baqian's direction, and nodded at the person who had the same face as him. It wasn't only him. When he came in, the rest of the people also looked at him and Ren Baqian. After all, there were 2 people who looked exactly the same. One was the 7th Prince of Great Xia, and the other was a secondary class, rank 6 official of Dayo. This kind of situation made many people feel that it was interesting. The moment Ren Baqian saw the 7th Prince, his heart surged with the same impulse he had previously. Furthermore, this feeling was even stronger than before. This made him squint his eyes slightly. After the 7th Prince brought his people to the seat of honor on the right side and sat down, Ren Baqian lowered his head slightly. His gaze was on the table, and he clenched his fists tightly for a while before releasing them. When an elder who was much thinner and weaker than the rest of the Aboriginals entered the palace, and his posture wasn't as straight as before, the noises in the palace quieted down a lot. Following which, everyone stood up and greeted him. Even those arrogant big shots in the army lowered their voices when they saw him. This person was the great elder Shi Qing. It was because of him that there were so many people in the Shi family's stronghold who held office in the palace. For example, Shi Hu and Shi Wanshan. Shi Qing was dressed in a deep red ceremonial robe. If it wasn't for the scar on his face, he would look like an old man on the street. Similarly, the junior elder, Shi Kohai, and Shi Qing entered almost one after the other. After the 2 of them arrived, the noises in the palace quieted down a lot, and the rest of the people were more or less quiet. The 2 of them sat on the 2nd and 3rd seats on the left side. Only the seat of honor was still empty, and many people's gazes drifted to that seat from time to time. Even Ren Baqian could roughly guess who that seat belonged to. Sure enough, a few minutes later, an ordinary-looking middle-aged man who gave off the impression of a towering mountain entered the palace. Everyone quietened down. Even the 2nd elder didn't behave like this when he entered. Everyone stood up as a form of respect for the strong Sir Hongwu. Everyone greeted him. In particular, the voices of the big shots in the army were the loudest. On the right side, the people from the 3 nations also focused their attention on this man, who could be said to be the most prestigious person in Dayo. Everyone was somewhat curious about Hongwu. After Hongwu sat down, the noises in the palace became much quieter. Everyone knew that the banquet was about to begin. At this moment, Renbachian adjusted his mood and looked at the opposite side. There was a row of gigolos sitting in front of him. There were all kinds of them. There were the handsome boy type, the handsome man type, the playboy type, the melancholic and melancholy type. If this group of people were to be placed in the other nations, they might really attract the screams of many young girls who yearned for love and become a good couple. However, when he thought of the Empress's cold temperament and martial arts, Renbachian felt that these people probably wouldn't stand a chance. After all, the Empress wasn't a 15 or 16-year-old girl who hadn't seen the world before. She couldn't be deceived with just her looks. It was useless even if one's eyes could electrify. Renbachian looked at the peach blossom eyes opposite him and shuddered. Just as Renbachian was sizing them up, grading, and letting his imagination run wild, a group of maids served the dishes. This time, the palace really quieted down. The kind of absolute silence. Everyone looked at the dishes in front of them and thought, "What the hell is this?" Chapter 118. The first dish was a plate of 8 freshwater fishes with their eyes wide open. Only the fish heads were exposed. The imperial kitchen even deliberately arranged the fish heads, as if they were staring at you. The second dish was 4 eggs. Half of them were smashed, revealing the furry and matured birds inside. The third dish was a piece of brain that was emitting steam. It looked no different from human brains, except that it was slightly bigger. Then some chopped green onions were sprinkled on it. Soon after, the palace hall started buzzing again. Everyone was whispering to each other. Was there something wrong with the dishes at this banquet? Following which, some people started to look at the entrance of the main hall. There was a person sitting there. Facing the murderous gazes of the crowd, Renbachian immediately felt as if he was sitting on pins and needles. This was arranged by the Empress. "Why are you looking at me? Isn't it just stargazing? Isn't it just duck eggs? Isn't it just steamed goat's brain? Isn't it just fried spiders?" Renbachian looked at the few dishes in front of him, especially the steamed goat's brain that was emitting steam and the plate of fried spiders. He felt that he had lost his appetite. One of the remaining 2 dishes was a roasted vole. The other dish looked better, but if they knew what it was made of, it was estimated that no one would be willing to eat it. This group of people definitely didn't want to know what it was made of. If they knew, they would have the heart to strangle Renbachian. Being stared at by so many eyes, especially from the big shots in the imperial court, Renbachian felt uncomfortable all over. Which bastard sold me out? How did they know? He didn't think about it. After so many years of banquets, there had never been such problems. Yet this happened not long after he arrived. Furthermore, he always went to the palace. It was easy for others to associate it with him. The 7th prince looked at the dishes in front of him and felt a little scared. No matter how he looked at it, it didn't look like something that could be eaten. Speaking of which, he was the dignified 7th prince. He had always lived a luxurious life. When had he ever seen such things? Not only him, but the others were also similar. Even though they didn't have a high status like him, they were all born with a silver spoon in their mouths. Even if they had suffered, it was just a little. They had never eaten such strange food before. Everyone looked up to see what was going on with the Dayo people. In the end, they saw that everyone was looking in the same direction. Looking at the gazes of the big shots in Dayo's imperial court, the people from the 3 nations frowned and felt nauseous. Then they looked at him with all kinds of malicious gazes. Looking at those Dayo people, they would be fools if they didn't know that this was Renbachian's doing. From these dishes, they could feel the dense malice that assaulted their senses. They also recalled their old and new grudges. For a moment, Renbachian, who was sitting at the corner of the door, became the center of attention. But the biggest mastermind was the Empress. Without her approval, how could I arrange this? Renbachian felt that he definitely wouldn't be able to stick his head into his pants. He didn't have the guts to frown at the thousands of fingers pointing at him, so he decided to close his eyes and play dead. Even with his eyes closed, Renbachian still felt a chill on his body. Her Majesty has arrived. Renbachian was finally saved after hearing the voice at the door. The Empress was a little different today. She no longer had the lazy look that Rinpoche had seen in the past. Her hair was tied up in a bun with a carved ruby hairpin. Her lips were as red as blood. Coupled with her cold temperament and her status, Rinpoche was stunned the moment she entered. Her clothes today were also a little different. She usually wore red muslin, but tonight, she wore a red silk dress with golden embroidery patterns on her body. There was also a phoenix with its wings spread out on her back. Previously, Rinpoche flattered the Empress by saying that she was the most beautiful in the world. After seeing the Empress today, Rinpoche had no choice but to admit that he wasn't exaggerating. If 10 points were the full score, the Empress's appearance would be given 9 points, her temperament would be given another point, the 7th most powerful expert in the world would be given another point, and the ruler of a nation would be given another point. She would need at least 12 points. On the other hand, the group of gigolos stared blankly at the Empress, but they didn't dare to look at her for too long. They knew that the person in front of them could kill them with a single slap, but they still raised their heads to look at her. Then they lowered their heads and raised their heads. Naturally, the seat of honor in the hall belonged to the Empress. After she sat down, the banquet officially began. When the Empress entered the hall, she swept a glance to the side. After seeing the food on everyone's table, she felt carefree and smiled. Who asked all of you to nag about marriage and having children every day? In fact, Rinpoche was still wrong. If it wasn't for everyone taking turns to force her to get married during the court session a few days ago, the Empress wouldn't have asked him to prepare this menu. It was the people from the other 3 nations who were implicated by the many officials of Dayo. May Dayo always be brave and mighty. The Empress sat at the seat of honor and raised her cup. May your Majesty always be brave and mighty. Everyone raised their cups. Rinpoche also followed suit. At this moment, no one was in the mood to care about him, and he finally heaved a sigh of relief. He downed the cup in one go. The alcohol was strong, and it went straight down his throat like a knife. His stomach was burning. At this moment, everyone should be eating to calm themselves down. However, everyone's eyes were on the Empress, and no one moved their chopsticks. A few people who couldn't hold their liquor lowered their heads and looked at the food on their plates. Then, they fiercely glared at Rinpoche. The Empress raised her cup again and said, "May all of you be honored." "May all of you be honored, Your Majesty." Everyone raised their cups. Once again, they downed the cup. After 2 rounds, some people couldn't take it anymore. Especially the row of gigolos opposite them. Although they were only attending the banquet, and the 2 toasts had nothing to do with them, they still had to drink. At this moment, he lowered his head and swept his gaze across the table. After pondering for a long time, it seemed that only the braised pig intestines looked edible. When he placed it in his mouth with his eyes closed, the taste was unexpected. His mouth was filled with fragrance. This made everyone heave a sigh of relief. Fortunately, that bastard didn't go too far. Many people looked at Rinpoche again, wondering if he would eat it. If he didn't, they would beat him to death when they got out. The Empress was sitting at the seat of honor in the hall, but a group of people were looking at the door. Rinpoche looked at everyone's gaze. "Alright, I'll try it out with my own body. Otherwise, I'll really be out of luck when I get out." First, he tasted the braised pig intestines. It wasn't bad. The cooking skills of the Imperial Kitchen's chefs were pretty good. They should have been practicing recently. Following which, he grabbed a spider and put it in his mouth. He had never eaten this thing before. The colorful spider looked disgusting, but he braced himself and put it in his mouth. It's crispy and tastes like chicken. It tastes better than the braised pig intestines. Rinpoche's eyes lit up. This thing was more delicious than he had expected. He grabbed another spider and put it in his mouth. For a moment, the entire hall was filled with him grabbing spiders left and right and putting them into his mouth. Chapter 119. Everyone watched as Ning Kaichen ate with relish. Doubtfully, he picked up the spider and sized it up. Grinning, he hesitated for a long time before closing his eyes and frowning. Like a bitter gourd, he placed the spider into his mouth. After chewing twice, he immediately opened his eyes and gave a thumbs up to Rinpoche. The taste was indeed not bad. It was just too disgusting to look at. When the others saw what the two of them were doing, they thought to themselves, it doesn't look bad. It's just too disgusting. The others also picked up the spiders and tasted them. Then they nodded in agreement. The faces of the few gigolos twitched. After thinking about it, they decided to go back and eat the braised pig intestines. As for the other dishes, no one touched them. The Empress looked down at the crowd from her seat of honor, raised her cup again and said, "This cup is for Dayo to exist forever. Dayo shall last forever." The row of people on the left continued to raise their glasses and drink. The people on the right were drinking silently, not saying a word. The Empress's next cup of wine was to thank everyone for coming all the way to Dayo to present their gifts. No matter what she thought, she still gave them some face. After all, she had sold most of the birthday gifts in the past few years in exchange for weapons. Long live the Empress of Dayo. The row of people on the right raised their glasses in unison. At this point, the Empress's opening was considered over, and everyone was more or less relaxed. Since someone was singing the ceremonial list in front of the hall, it was at least something to show off. General who supports the nation, Hong Wu, is a jade fairy. The first one was Hong Wu. After hearing this, Ren Baqian was still pondering what this jade embryo was. At the very least, it sounded high-end and grand. The others had already started to make a ruckus. The seventh prince, who was seated on the right, felt envious when he heard about the jade embryo. This was something that could only be found by chance. He had only heard of it but had never seen it before. The royal family of the Great Xia dynasty had been searching for it for so many years, but they had only found one. No one knew where Hongwu got one, but not only did he not hide it, he actually gave it to Qi Zixiao. It seemed that it was true that Hongwu and Qi Zixiao had a good relationship. After all, Hongwu definitely did not give this to Qi Zixiao. With his status, he did not need it. The immortal jade only had one use, but the emperor of the Grand Xia dynasty would be willing to exchange an entire city for it. It could extend one's lifespan by 20 years and maintain one's appearance at the time of consumption. Only when one's lifespan came to an end would one rapidly age. Longevity was the eternal pursuit of mankind. Maintaining appearance is the eternal pursuit of all women. These 2 points alone were enough to make everyone in the world go crazy. Hongwu took out a box from nowhere and placed it in front of the Empress. This item was too valuable, and he had to hand it over to the Empress personally. A warm feeling flowed through the Empress's heart. She knew that if it were someone else, they wouldn't take it out so easily. Without waiting for the others to receive it, the Empress immediately reached out to take it. She opened the box and revealed a round piece of jade. The Empress held the jade in her palm. Through the light, she could see an object that looked like a small person. "Thank you, Great General." The Empress nodded and placed the jade back into the box. Then she placed the box beside her. This thing was also very valuable to her. She didn't care about 20 years of lifespan, but she was moved by the idea of eternal youth. After Hongwu returned to his seat, everyone stood up. "Congratulations, Your Majesty." Apart from Hongwu, most of the other people's gifts were heaven-grade weapons, meteoric iron, rare treasures, and so on. Even though they were also very valuable, they paled in comparison to Hongwu's gift. Honglu Deputy, Storyteller Ren Baqian of Qingxin Palace Hall. The person who presented the gift paused for a while and continued. "Presenting a supreme mirror that is worthy of Your Majesty's possession." The palace was silent again. It was simply comparable to Hongwu's jade embryo. However, previously, everyone was shocked that Hongwu actually presented this treasure to Her Majesty. At this moment, everyone was thinking, what the hell is this? Their eyes swept across Ren Baqian, who was standing at the door. The Empress, who was originally in a good mood, was stunned when she heard this. Soon after, her eyes curved and she almost burst out laughing. "A supreme mirror that is worthy of Your Majesty's possession? What a strange name. I want to see if it really lives up to its name in a while." Following which, the people from the other 3 nations presented various gifts. The 7th prince's gift also surprised many people. 7 dragon scales and a drop of dragon blood. This gift was considered an extravagant one. Previously, when the 7th prince arrived, Everyone was a little surprised. Why would a prince of Great Xia come to celebrate the Empress's birthday? They reckoned that he had other important matters to attend to. At this moment, the gift further confirmed everyone's conjecture. Only the Empress and the seventh prince knew that these 7 dragon scales were real dragon scales, and that drop of dragon blood was dried up real dragon blood. Even though there was one word missing, the difference was like heaven and earth. That day, after the Empress flipped the table, the seventh prince pondered hard. Even though he didn't know what was so important about Renbaqian that Qi Zhixiao would directly flip the table, he still decided to take a gamble after a few days of consideration. Even if he was the 7th most powerful expert in the world, this gift was still very valuable, especially considering his status. He was betting that Qi Zhixiao would give him the thing he wanted. That bottle of blood was too important to him. It could save him at least 10 years of hard work. Even if this private transaction became public, and the news of him giving such an important thing to the Dayo Empress would spread back to Great Xia, he didn't care. Once the Empress heard about this gift, she understood the 7th prince's intention. Since the other party had already done so, she would give him the Kirin blood. The next gift was more interesting. It was actually a painting of 100 beauties. It would be fine if it was given to a man like a prince, but what was the meaning of giving it to the Empress? Most of the other gifts were jewels or paintings. Very few people were interested in them. There were only 2 that everyone was interested in. One was Renbaqian's, a supreme mirror worthy of your majesty. The other was Ning Xiqin's 100 beauties. Many people felt that there was definitely something strange about this 100 beauties. The Empress seemed to understand everyone's thoughts and directly said, "Bring out the 100 beauties and Renbaqian's gifts. I think everyone would also like to see what they look like." The first to be brought out was the 100 beauties. It was a 1.2 meter wide painting scroll that was 10 meters long after it was unfolded. The figures on it were vivid and lifelike. Indeed, all of them were exceptionally talented. The people from the Yun Nation, Chen Nation, and Great Xia realized that the people on the painting were actually the most outstanding beauties in the world. Not only their looks but their martial arts, background and so on. The person who collected this 100 beauties was indeed a formidable person. At the very least, it would require resources to meet one of them. Furthermore, there was a person on the painting that everyone found somewhat familiar. Everyone's gaze fell on the 7th prince. One of the women was actually Xiao Wu, who was always by the 7th prince's side. Chapter 120. Great Xia's young master Ning, please talk about this painting. The Empress looked at it carefully and didn't see anything strange. The ladies in the painting were stunning. Could it be that Ning Kaichen wanted to put them on par with her? What a joke! Ning Kaichen stood up and cupped his hands at the Empress. Dayo's Empress, please forgive me for being impulsive. This painting was made by a strange person. His lifelong wish was to paint all the beauties in the world. However, he couldn't continue after painting 99 of them. Why? Someone beside him asked. Because out of these 99 beauties, there was one person who received a score of 5. However, he couldn't paint that person no matter how hard he tried. Therefore, when he knew that I was coming to Dayo, he entrusted this painting to me and presented it to the Empress to fulfill his wish. After that, Your Majesty can burn this painting. There are number 100 beauties in this world. One person is enough. How can others be compared to her? Ning Kaichen cupped his hands and said. Everyone was dumbfounded by his words. Even Renbaqian was cursing in his heart. How can you suck up to such an extent? How are you going to survive after returning to Great Xia? Ning Kaichen was a talent and a formidable enemy. If he had known earlier, he would have left him behind to feed the wolves. Needless to say, the rest of the people couldn't even take out the poems that they had prepared to praise the Empress. They couldn't take it out at all. With Ning Xiqin's performance, whatever the rest of them said would be useless. However, the 7th prince frowned. 100 Xiao Wus couldn't even compare to one Qi Zhixiao? Qi Zhixiao received a score of 5 out of 5 out of 5? How could he feel about this? It was as if he was the only one who treated a commoner like a treasure. His mood immediately turned sour. Previously, the Empress was a little unhappy, but now, her face relaxed and the corners of her mouth curled up. Everyone could see that the Empress was in a good mood. Great Xia's young master Ning, I will accept this painting. The Empress nodded. Ning Kaichen cupped his hands and returned to his seat. Your Majesty naturally has a score of 5 out of 5 out of 5. A burly man touched his bald head and laughed. Not just 5 out of 5 but 6 out of 7 as well. I think that mutant's vision is still too shallow. Another burly man immediately followed up. A group of burly men began to brag about the Empress. However, these words were only effective if the first person said it. The Empress said, bring out Renbaqian's gift. I think everyone is curious, and I'm also extremely curious. After the Empress opened her mouth, everyone nodded their heads in succession. They were indeed curious about what exactly was the half-body supreme mirror that Her Majesty was talking about. The name was strange, but the tone was also very big. Next, 2 people carried a box to the center of the hall. The outer packaging wasn't very exquisite. In fact, it was very rough. It was an outer box made of wood. Through the cracks, one could see what was inside, but they couldn't tell what it was. Renbaqian, you can take out your gift for everyone to see, the Empress said. Renbaqian stood up and walked to the center of the hall. Fortunately, he was prepared. Even though Ning Saichen's bootlicking was excellent, Renbaqian was not inferior to Ning Saichen's, and could be considered the best bootlicking ever. May I trouble any sirs to open this box? Don't damage the item inside. Renbaqian cupped his hands and said to the row of people on the left. Everyone looked at each other. If it was a more troublesome item, they would be a little interested. However, they were too lazy to touch this wooden box. Let me do it. In the end, a burly man at the end of the row stood up and walked to the front of the hall. He first bowed to the Empress, then gently pinched the wooden box with his fingers and broke it. He pinched it from the top to the bottom, then pulled it apart with both hands. The entire wooden box fell to pieces. Renbaqian held onto the half-body mirror that was wrapped in craft paper, and nodded to that burly man to express his gratitude. Thank you very much, sirs. Following which, he tore the craft paper and revealed a shiny silver mirror. The frame was made of European metal and was extremely complicated to make. Just the pattern and craftsmanship alone would require a lot of effort for a blacksmith to make it. What was even more attractive was the surface of the mirror. It was different from the somewhat blurry and dim copper mirrors that were currently used. This mirror reflected the outside world without any blur, and everything was extremely clear. The inside of the mirror was truly like another hall. Everything down to the finest detail could be seen. After seeing this mirror, there wasn't a single woman in the hall who wasn't tempted. There were also 10 words on the left and right sides of this mirror. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. Someone read out the words one by one. Everyone was shocked. Renbaqian cupped his hands toward the Empress and said, there is only one such mirror in this world. I believe that only Her Majesty is qualified to possess it. Just like the words on the mirror. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. It had to be said that Renbaqian's bootlicking was too effective. Just now, Ning Saichen's 100 beauties had already amazed everyone. At this moment, when Renbaqian took out the mirror, everyone was shocked. The mirror was a rare treasure, but the words on it were the most important. If heaven didn't give birth to Her Majesty, the ages would be like a long night. Before heaven let Her Majesty be born, the ages would be like a long night. These words were too imposing. Everyone could feel the imposing manner from these words. Previously, Ning Kaichen said that Her Majesty took up 50% of all the women in the world. The other 99 exceptional beauties took up 40%, and the rest of the women only took up 1%. Only when all the women in the world were added up could they compete with Her Majesty. This was already an extremely exaggerated praise, and Ning Kaichen would probably have some trouble in the future. However, this was still comparing Her Majesty to other women. When it came to Renbaqian, it went one step further. Since ancient times, this mirror included all the outstanding geniuses. all the heroes who dominated the world, and all the emperors who ruled the world. Before Her Majesty appeared in this world. Even with all of you, this world was still in the dark night. After Her Majesty was born, this world was truly glorious. Compared to Her Majesty, all of you are but the light of a firefly. Just now, they could still respond to Ning Saichen's words, but now they didn't dare to respond to Renbaqian's words. These words were too arrogant. He truly regarded the heroes of the world as nothing and the countless heroes of the past thousands of years as nothing. Even in their own homes, no one dared to say these words, let alone on such an occasion. After recovering from the shock, the people from Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chen nation glared at Renbaqian. Wasn't this flattery too much? Everyone felt that Renbaqian's bootlicking had gone too far this time. Qi Zixiao might not dare to respond to these words. Putting everything else aside, in terms of strength, she was only the 7th most powerful expert in the world, and not the #1 expert in the world. If she were to respond to these words, what would the other 6 people think of her? What would the Emperor of Great Xia think of her? Did she really think that there was no one else in this world? For a moment, the hall quietened down again. No one spoke as they waited to see how this would end. Chapter 121. Storyteller Run, the mirror is excellent. Just pretend that you didn't hear any nonsense. You may leave now. The old man sitting in the 3rd seat said. Junior Elder Zhikohai was the highest-ranking person in Deyo besides Qi Zixiao, Hongwu and Shiqing. With these words, the matter was settled. He reprimanded Renbaqian as nonsense and chased him out. That was the end of the matter. It seemed like the junior elder had helped the emperor out of his predicament. However, many people were frowning as well. Since he had already spoken, those with lower statuses couldn't say anything before Her Majesty spoke. Renbaqian was surprisingly calm. Looking at everyone's reaction, he would be a fool if he didn't know what the problem was. In fact, he had already thought about this problem. However, based on the Empress's behavior, he decided to use this line. Perhaps everyone thinks that I'm being arrogant, but that's how I feel. If Her Majesty wants me to speak, it should be Her Majesty. Renbaqian cupped his hands and didn't say anything else. He naturally knew who he should listen to and who he shouldn't. However, he felt that there was still a chance to turn the situation around. He had some understanding of the Empress over the past few days. Her thoughts were probably different from these people. Do you think that I'm being arrogant? Just as Renbaqian finished speaking, the Empress suddenly spoke with a cold voice. When the Empress said this, everyone in Deyo quivered. Was Her Majesty going to flip out? Some people really thought so. However, if they said yes, it would mean that they felt that the Empress wasn't worthy. That would be courting death. Especially when the Empress looked like she was going to flip out. In particular, how could the people from Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Chen nation say anything? They were just waiting to see how this show would turn out. Renbaqian turned his head and saw the Empress. Her face was calm as usual, and he couldn't tell what she was thinking. Your Majesty. A burly man was about to stand up and speak, but he was interrupted by a sudden burst of laughter. I think these words are good. They are indeed worthy of Her Majesty. If anyone has any objections, you can ask me first. Hongwu suddenly slapped the table and laughed. He didn't say that the Empress was worthy of these words, but he said that they were worthy of her. He unscrupulously slapped the table and laughed heartily, his voice unbridled. He was number 9 in the world. He had the guts and the spirit to say such words. If he didn't even dare to say these words, then he wouldn't be worthy of being the 9th in the world. However, the others were different from him. No matter how reckless they were, their strength was not at their level, and their breadth of mind was not at their level. This was the difference between Hongwu and the others. Hongwu's gaze swept across the faces of everyone on the right, but no one spoke. That's right. If anyone has any objections, show me your blade. The burly man who wanted to get up just now said. Even though they were all aboriginals, there was still a difference of opinion between the military and civil officials. Zhikohai frowned as he stood up and cupped his fists. I have something to say. Zhikohai. How dare you? The hairpin on the Empress's head exploded, and all her hair fluttered behind her. His Majesty is really angry, everyone thought to themselves when they saw the situation. A terrifying aura enveloped the entire hall. The aura was so thick and terrifying that it shocked everyone. It wasn't that His Majesty hadn't flipped out in the past, but the aura was never this terrifying. Many people were pressed down on their chairs by this aura and couldn't move at all. If there were people who weren't affected, it would be Rinpochian. It was as if there was a typhoon around him, and he didn't feel anything at all. The other person was Hongwu, who wasn't affected at all. The other Dayo officials felt as if there was a huge mountain pressing down on their heads, and they could be smashed to pieces at any time. Even though they knew that the Empress definitely wouldn't do that, this terrifying aura still frightened them. The Empress stared at Jakohai with a cold expression, but everyone felt that she was like a volcano that was about to erupt. When I first inherited the throne, you were the one who jumped up and down the most. Later on, when I stabilized my position, you also calmed down, and I kept you around. However, you spoke up before I even said anything. You even dared to chase my people out of this banquet. You are too presumptuous. Others might not know what you are thinking, but do you think I don't? Do you have any objections to these words? The Empress asked coldly. How dare you chase my people out? What are you trying to say? Sweat trickled down Jakohai's forehead like water. He didn't expect the Empress to have such a big reaction. The Empress's terrifying aura suppressed him to the point that he couldn't get up. He was also shocked. From the aura, he could tell that the person above him was even more powerful. However, he didn't know exactly how powerful she was because he couldn't sense it. Your Majesty, I have something to say. Jakohai gritted his teeth and said, Speak. The Empress's cold voice seemed to explode in everyone's ears. I'm confused. I was wrong just now. Jakohai gritted his teeth and said. At this moment, he had no choice but to lower his head. The aura of the person above him was too terrifying, and he couldn't move at all. Furthermore, he had a feeling that if he said anything more, he might not be able to leave the palace. After Jakohai admitted his mistake, the Empress snorted and slowly withdrew her aura. The people from the three nations looked at the Empress with uneasy gazes. Was this the strength of the seventh most powerful expert in the world? Just her aura alone made them unable to move, as if they were nailed to their chairs. It was really terrifying. Even though they knew that this person was very terrifying, they had never experienced it personally, so they had some other thoughts. In particular, the Empress's age and appearance made them think even more. However, at this moment, no one dared to have any other thoughts. The lips of a few weak gigolos had turned pale. On the other hand, many people in Dayo were thinking, Your Majesty's strength has become even more terrifying. The Empress glanced at the people below and said, I like these words very much, so I'll keep them. If anyone has any objections, let him or her look for me. Her usual lazy and indifferent voice was swept away. It was filled with coldness and a domineering aura. I'll treat all of you as nothing. If anyone has any objections, come and fight me. Following which, the Empress looked at Rinpochian, who was standing alone in the hall with a smile on his face, and remained silent. Everyone didn't know what the Empress was looking at or thinking about at this moment. They all looked at Rinpochian and wanted to see something from him. Rinpochian stood alone in the hall while being surrounded by more than 200 people. Besides the big shots in the imperial court, they were all descendants of aristocratic families from other nations. When had he ever received such treatment? His whole body began to stiffen. He asked in his heart 100 times, What exactly is the situation now? For a full 10 minutes, the atmosphere in the hall remained in this state. At this moment, the Empress opened her mouth. Her voice wasn't as cold as before, but had a different meaning. Rinpochian, I like you very much. I hereby issue an imperial edict to summon you into the palace and make you the Empress. After the Empress said this, other than Rinpochian who still had a blank look on his face, everyone else stood up from their chairs in shock. Even Hongwu was dumbfounded. That you're tuning in to the Limei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.